over here for the.
Mine's like.
I'm going to call to order the Needham Housing Authority Board of Directors meeting, special board meeting of February 11th, 2023. And call the roll. Reg Foster is here.
Eleanor Evans is here.
Ed Shadler is here.
Penny Burke here. Janice Bennett here.
And I declare that we have a quorum, and we have our Assistant Executive Director Cheryl Gosman here. Steve Merritt cannot join us. And we have our guests from the Cambridge Housing Authority, Margaret Moran, Natalie Jansen on Zoom, and Joe DeLorenz. We're all here in the Needham Public Library Conference Room, which I've never had a meeting in before, but it's magnificent. We have one resident with us, Ross Donald. And I also just want to state the record that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by the Secretary of the Needham Housing Authority via public notice dated February 7th, 2023, that was sent to the town clerk from Needham and provided to people requesting. So we have the main agenda for today is to talk about the final decision as to which repositioning strategy we select. But we've smuggled a couple of important agenda items up front here that can't wait until next Thursday's regular weekly board meeting. By way of announcement from the chair, I just want to start off by saying that Steve Merritt has been taken ill. He had a fall on a week ago Friday and had to go to the hospital, and he's out of the hospital as of yesterday afternoon and resting comfortably at home. Cheryl's had a chance, Cheryl and I had a chance to talk to him briefly, and he's not clear exactly how long he's supposed to be in recovery mode here. But fortunately, we have our Assistant Executive Director who stepped up to the challenge, and as far as I know, everything's running fine and trains are running on time and office operations here. I should also mention that yesterday was Gary Paul's last day, and there was a farewell party yesterday afternoon for him.
But we're going to hold on to him for a little longer. He will assist us in certain things that we need him to assist us with, particularly with the capital projects that are coming on and any advice that's needed with regards to the lending changes. Development.
Frank, would you mind shutting the door over there? Just thank you so much. You know, because the people walking through the hall and the bathroom there. Yeah, so and also I think, you know, helping find his replacement. And I know Steve had some irons in the fire there.
Yeah.
That he's still working.
Yeah.
But even though he's supposed to be completely, you know,
Resting,
yes, resting him.
he's still working.
And I did talk, both Cheryl and I talked to his partner, Peggy, and you know, we're offered any and all support. We said, don't worry about us. We'll be fine. You pay attention to yourself. We had flowers delivered to him at the room from all of us here. And so I think we're, you know, good shape.
We're in great shape, actually, and we're still in communication. Steve is checking in with us. As you said, the train is on time, moving forward, and
On schedule.
on schedule, and we're doing okay.
Good. So the other chairman's announcement I just want to mention is this is maybe one of the last next week, maybe one of the last hybrid meeting situations that we have. The governor's special order, you know, for the COVID hybrid meeting thing, so that board members can attend remotely, expires at the end of next month. So I just wanted to give everybody a heads up for the next couple of meetings that's happening. It's not clear what's going to emerge out of this. I think everybody has thought the hybrid meeting thing, although a pandemic emergency thing, is actually provides a great option for public participation. And so think that will continue in some form. But there's also a lot of talk about requiring board members to show up in person. Because of, in some quarters, people believe that's a better thing and to have happen. That's out, above our pay grade, it'll be decided at the state level. And or the town level, and just stay tuned here on that. So no more dialing in from vacation in Florida or things, that sort of thing. That's the announcements. Let's go to agenda item A, the roof replacement. Cheryl, do you want to tell us what this is all about?
So this is part of our capital HUD capital program for roof replacements for Captain Robert Cook Drive. It's long overdue. Gary has had put this work with an architect to put this out to bid. And we have the low bidder, which is Almar LLC. Very nice company. I've spoken with his management team, and he has come into the office to sign the contract and eager to go. So part of HUD's requirement is that the board actually approves the contract agreement. And that is before you today. In back of the first page or the second page of the agenda. It's the award and contract agreement for Almar LLC roof replacements.
And I'll just note for the minutes that it's near $459,000. So this is nearly $500,000, one of our bigger approval items from year to year. And we all have seen the moss growing on the roof of the Captain Robert's facility roofs. And any questions or comments or from the board for Cheryl?
When are they going to start?
Well, we are gonna obligate these funds, yes, once the contract is signed, and they are looking to start mid-March. So, but I will keep you updated on the actual start date. I'll get that
Just
information.
weather dependent. of
Weather
course, yeah.
dependent, exactly.
So
yeah.
we have
There you go.
like 100 inches of snow like we did in 2015 between now and March, April 1st, and then we'll be later here, but looks like we're not going to get much of a winter this winter. I also want to just note that this is, you might recollect that we have a bunch of backed up capital funds that it was sort of in use it or lose it mode, and the first tranche that had to be obligated is being used by this. This is the February
23rd.
23rd tranche. So obviously it's very important to approve this now. So nobody wants to turn the money back into HUD without putting it to good use. Any other comments or questions? So we actually have a formal motion document that has to be sent into HUD. That's before you. And I'll just read it again into the minutes here. And I'll make the motion to do that. I make the motion to approve the contractor agreement between Needham Housing Authority and Almar LLC, located at PO Box 662, Medfield, Massachusetts 02052 for roof replacements at the Captain Robert Cook Drive Apartments in Needham, Massachusetts 02494, in accordance with the plans and specifications prepared by Florentino Architecture LLC. The contractor agreement is based on a bid price of $459,000. We have a typo there to fix in the resolution on that number there. References have been reviewed by Florentino's Architecture LLC and Almar LLC, and have noted that the references were very positive. Based on the information and the recommendation, the positive recommendations about Almar LLC, the Needham Housing Authority Board of Commissioners resolves to accept the contract agreement with Almar LLC for Captain Robert Cook Drive roof replacement project in the amount of $459,000. It's a motion by Reginald Foster, and may I have a second? Second by Ed Scheidler. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I think we need to do a roll call vote on this one as well, even though we're in person, so Reg Foster votes aye.
Eleanor Evans votes aye.
Ed Scheidler votes aye.
Penny Kirk votes aye.
Janice Bennett votes aye.
Okay, so that is done. The second, agenda item here. Is the update on the search for the new executive director. Here. Steve is not here to give the status update. So I'm going to do that.
What about the search committee?
Do you have an update? Two?
No.
Okay, so I'm gonna, at the last meeting, our last board meeting, I'm not quite sure whether we dismissed Rick Glico and DB Mainsail, or he resigned, or both happened more or less simultaneously, but we tasked Steve to find a new search consultant. And Steve said he made some progress on that, but he got interrupted by his illness. So that has not been progressing nearly as fast as we would have hoped. Last Thursday or Wednesday, DHCD reached out to Steve and myself saying, what's going on with the search, and can give us a status update. And obviously Steve wasn't available to take the call, so I did. And I spoke with our housing specialist, Bob Pelletier, and his boss, Carrie Souza, and they had heard from Rick Lico that he had resigned with, the engagement, and we were looking for a new search consultant. And I also let them know that Steve was sick and that we hadn't made any progress, nor much progress there. So I wound up giving them the entire story going back to mid-December. Namely, we had 3 recommended candidates, 1 insider and 2 outside candidates recommended by the search committee. And then the 2 outside candidates withdrew or took another job. And the majority of the board voted to interview Cheryl, and then Cheryl withdrew her candidacy, and that there was a 4th very good candidate that had been floating around from Rick Lico, but that candidate never materialized into anything real. And that I told them what happened at the board meeting on the 17th. And that basically we're looking for a new search consultant, but not making progress, just Steve sick. I also told them that the majority of the board thought that the inside candidate, which was Cheryl Gosman, was very qualified and should be interviewed, and was disappointed that she had withdrawn her candidacy, and thought she'd be an excellent executive director right away and had enough experience, maybe not technically the way it's written up in the DHCD guidelines, but in other ways that met the equivalent. By the way, I was just trying to represent everybody's point of view here. And especially if they, maybe Cheryl had continued to have, a mentor or coach or some consulting assistance like what Steve Merritt had been providing, even if it isn't Steve, somebody else. And that also we need to recognize that the reality is we really tried for a year almost to find another candidate, and it's really thin out there. And meanwhile, we have a really excellent candidate right here in our midst. I'd say the majority of the board probably felt that way and would have gone ahead and interviewed Cheryl and would probably may have recommended that be submitted for DHCD approval. Somewhere in that conversation, they said, well, what about Steve Merritt? his contract, his 6-month extension expires in April. And isn't it going to take a long time to do a third search, another search, and just get somebody on board and so forth? And so what are we going to do about that? I said, well, Steve had indicated he'd continue to hang in with us, and that was what they said, we want to approve that. We never approve another 6 months extension, and we just don't do that as a matter of policy, and it was like, there was no, it was just like, this is the way it's going to be. I said, okay. And then they said, well, what was the concern about, that maybe the minority of the board had about putting forward the insider candidate? And I said, the only concern really was that it doesn't, that you would just not approve it. That there's oodles of experience, but it's a different kind of an experience. And you have been known to be very thorough about, ticking all the boxes exactly the way the boxes ought to be ticked. And they said, well, so why, what is this alternate experience? And I said, well, and then I threw out a couple, without getting into any detail, I threw out a couple of examples, like Cheryl's been involved in public housing for 20+ years, probably longer than anybody, that had been leader of the LTO and worked with rules and regulations there, and been a commissioner for 10+ years. I think it's 13 years, right? Yeah. So, but I was just doing this off the top of my head. That everybody had worked with Cheryl over this 2-decade period, and so they knew that she had a lot of qualifications that you would never find in any other candidate, including the qualification of somebody who really believes and wants to be leading the housing authority, the housing authority. And which point they said, maybe we should, we'd be willing to just take a preliminary look-see at this alternate experience if you want to kind of just take the temperature here. And at the beginning they were going, well, you either have the ticking the boxes or else. By the end, it was like, well, I guess that's a really kind of unique situation. And also we have to recognize that here we are without any success after doing the search, hard work by the search committee and the search consultant over the last 8 months. You have to recognize the reality of what it is. So I said, well, I've got a board meeting coming up in 2 days, and I would present all this to the board with a status update and see what they think. So that is the update.
I'd like to express what I think. I said I would like to express what I think.
I would invite you to go for it here.
Well, I understand that Cheryl is enrolled in both the DHCD and the HUD programs for public housing management, and is expected to complete these certifications by the end of February. And I would also say that having been on the job as an assistant executive director for a year now, a little over a year,
That counts.
that she has better qualifications than Angie did when we hired her.
Let's not use individual names, but it has excellent
our former,
qualifications, yes.
Executive director, so.
And maybe other former executive. I mean, I think the point is, excellent qualifications demonstrated for a year.
Plus a lot of administrative experience in different functions through the years. So I personally feel she's eminently qualified, that we should invite her to resubmit her application and that the board interview and approve.
Is that a motion?
Well, let's get discussion, and then I think the a motion is imminent here, but anybody else want to comment?
I was just gonna say, it's all moot unless she resubmits her application and her resume. So,
Technically, can I reword that? It would be withdrawn. Withdraw her recusal or whatever, because we wanted Otherwise, we have to start the process all over again, down several paragraphs, on the things, but your point is well taken, so. Yeah,
Also, I forgot this. When we interviewed Steve Merritt for the position of interim,
Hmm.
he indicated that in his retirement, he hoped to begin a consulting career.
Mhm.
So he certainly would be available to help Cheryl on a very short notice.
Mhm.
So that a mentor that you mentioned earlier would certainly be available
Mhm.
and would make up any gaps. I
Okay.
think.
Yeah, and I think I remember him saying that, and even if circumstances have changed with his illness, and of course, we don't know that. But there are other people like Steve, it's not only the Steve that's available out there. So, good point. Eleanor, you, have any thought?
It seems like a good idea to, I mean, if Cheryl would, as I guess you phrased it, withdraw her removal of her resume or whatever, so that we can.
I know, I didn't get them through.
You know, I mean, haven't seen her resume yet, so I would like, if you're gonna, well, I don't want to put any pressure on you, so anyway, but, I think that would be a good process to move forward.
Cheryl, do you have anything to say?
I just want to say thank you, everyone, for your support, and that I absolutely love the work that I do, and that I'm 100+% committed to the job, to the folks that I serve, and to being the best that I can possibly be in that role. I know that I can depend on Reg as well, for guidance, and then Reg has indicated that he will, help me, with some additional support. But I am doing the job. There's a lot on the job that I'm doing, and it's a very fast-paced schedule. And, we have an excellent group of people that make it work, that help make it work. So I'm not in it by myself. And that's the good thing, that I'm not in it by myself, and that my desire and my goal is to be a great manager, and to help the housing authority become a high-performing housing authority. That's really one of the goals. And also to provide great, excellent service, customer service for our residents. I can't emphasize enough how much I enjoy what I do. So I'm really thrilled for this opportunity, and I will not let you down. Will not.
So that sort of sounds like you are,
I'm ready.
you are, you send in your recusal, email, just to get it on the record,
Okay,
if you're willing to do that.
yes.
Okay, so, a couple other points I would make here. Go ahead, Penny, sorry.
I just thought I'd have an opportunity to say something.
No, I'm sorry.
About
I
this.
mean, skip over you there.
I've known Cheryl probably almost as long as Janice has. And that's a long time, 15 years or so.
Mhm.
And she demonstrated to me right away when I first took the job as service coordinator that she really was very committed to the operation of the housing authority, and she's the one who inspired me to pick up where she and Janice had left off in terms of the after-school program. And I read the proposal that they made to the Congregational Church with all the typing errors and everything else. It was really adorable.
Yeah,
And you got a whole bunch of money from that.
we did. We got 10,000. Yeah, got about $60,000 from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that really got things going.
They
So
believed in what we're doing for the children.
for the children, yeah. So that's a
The,
long time
the
ago.
theme was to break the cycle of poverty. That was the
Exactly.
thing that got them. And that's what we were attempting to do through education, entrepreneurship, homeownership.
So that was, there's the dedication from, as far as my experience, for the last 15 years, and it was before then, I'm sure, because by then you were no longer living in housing,
I
right?
had purchased a condo on St. Mary's Street.
Yeah.
Can't go far.
5 bedrooms, I don't know what I was thinking of. And so, you know, trying to afford Needham was a challenge. But it was great, and I appreciate that, and thank you so much.
So
So,
I'm 100% behind Cheryl.
I would just also add that Cheryl, I'm one of the people that Cheryl broke in as well, just to add to that. She and I like overlap. Couple, 3 years, I'm not quite sure how many, but
Oh, yeah, it's something.
so I had a regular monthly or bi-weekly opportunity to work with Cheryl, so I do not disagree with anything. Around the table there.
So
I mean-
while, oh, sorry.
Hmm?
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, while we're all chiming in on how long we've known Cheryl, so I know Cheryl from Needham Opportunities days, back in the early 2000s.
That's right, yes.
And you were born.
I was the board, no, I was not, Rich Gatto.
Oh, right,
He was the chair.
Yeah. So anyway. Impressed with
So that
Cheryl
was a
back
lot of
then.
fun,
Yeah.
yes.
Now, this is not the interview, by the
No,
way.
no.
This is just.
This is a couple things I'll throw in here. I think, again, I hear support around the table for, hiring that coaching or whatever mentoring function and having that continue for the next year. That's something that the board would support doing. By the way, I would just say extremely common practice in the private sector. If you have a brand new CEO, they, 9 times out of 10 will do that. And that's because of the good. And by the way, that's not me. I'm still going to be supporting Cheryl. This is as much as I supported Angie, as we all would do. But it's important to have somebody that isn't your boss, even if it's, or your, brawler boss. It's important to have a voice of experience. Sometimes we remember those tough situations. The second thing I just want to note, not because we have to do anything about it, but we decided a year ago that we needed an executive director and an assistant executive director because of the increased workload that we expected to come before us, which I think we're experiencing for the rest of the morning. And, and for the next few years ahead with the PRI. So again, if we go down this path, there's an open assistant executive director position. We need to think about how we go about filling that one. So again, just want to have a mental note there. The other question before we do any motion is how do people feel? Should we take advantage of their offer to just do a preliminary vetting and see if we can get that done quickly, maybe by this Thursday's board meeting or
Could
something
you
like
say that again?
put a preliminary vetting. In other words, they said, if you send us Cheryl's resume
Okay,
and the case that is being made that while it does not meet the letter of the law, line by line, if you give credit, for all these years of commissioner experience, of tenant experience, of LTO experience, combined now with 1 year that we have
I
here,
understand what you're getting at.
that meets the 5-year experience requirement, or exceeds it. Plus, if there are all these other qualities or benefits that Cheryl brings to the table, like she might be here 10 years from now,
Mhm.
as executive director. We certainly haven't, I said that to them, it's been musical chairs for the last 5-10 years there. And that's very disruptive to have a new executive director every 2 or 3 years, so.
We've had 7 executive directors in the last 15 years.
Exactly. So, is it the sense of the board that we, should get back to them on Monday or early next week and see if we can get them to quickly say, we're not going to just reject this out of hand? And I think it's also maybe a part of getting them, their heads wrapped around the idea that this is happening. They will not reject it. By the way, this is just an indicator. This is unusual for them to do it. They've never done to my knowledge, they've never done anything like this before. Maybe, Margaret knows, the examples, but usually they do not, they're never flexible. And they have good reasons for that. I'm not trying to criticize it, but it makes it hard for small, medium-sized LHAs like ourselves. So why don't we go ahead with that motion that basically, Ed, that says that we want to do that informal check with the DHCD and invite as part of the prior process, because if we don't want to trigger them wanting to do it, but invite her for a formal interview with the board and the residents. And, meeting all the, compliance requirements that we have to do, something to that effect.
I shall move.
I second.
Would that interview be at next week's board meeting?
Let's talk about that. A motion is on the floor. Now we're going to discuss it. And the motion says, if I got it right, and at our interview, Cheryl, at our earliest convenience. Okay. Should we try to do it during the regular board meeting on Thursday, or should we? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So the motion says at our earliest convenience, and with that being the, understanding of that is at the next board meeting here. So we need to give Cheryl a little time to prepare for this unexpected turnaround of events. So that's another thing I sort of had in mind, whether you thought you would be ready by then. All right, so motion and a second, any other discussion? Hearing none, we can actually do this by a voice vote because we're all in person. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed or none, so that carries, Cheryl, 5-0. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Oh, boy.
So also, so even if DHCD hasn't gotten back to us by next Thursday's meeting, and we interview Cheryl, then we can still send officially the
Right.
stuff to be.
Right. I think it'd be helpful for me to also say that we've decided to do that. So they have a bit of a deadline to get back with their preliminary indication. One of my concerns is, I guess the optics, I'm looking for a very neutral word. There's other words I can think of, but I don't want to be optics of being in a situation of interviewing Cheryl if DHCD is going to do what they typically do, which is just, not be flexible because they have to maintain the same standards everywhere. So, yeah, I think we would go forward even if we haven't heard back from DHCD. Does everybody agree with that?
Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
and then you can post on Monday what the agenda is. You have plenty of time for public meeting.
Yep. We've already posted the agenda yesterday, but we can post a revised agenda on Monday. Thank you for the reminder. So we'll make sure we take care of that here. So,
And I usually post on Friday as well, so.
well, no, it's not uncommon for the agenda to be amended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
And,
you have a certain amount of time. You can do it.
48 hours. Yeah. So we should
And
take.
then I guess also could the board packet be adjusted to include whatever
Yeah.
materials.
Absolutely.
So, that's one thing we'll work on, getting the right materials in there. So for that, good. Okay, we did our time budget here, Margaret and Natalie, a little bit, but I think for a good cause. I think the floor is yours. We are now on agenda item B. C, the NHA repositioning strategy decision, and you see the bullets there, what we intend to do. The goal, if we're comfortable, is to see if we can make a decision, on which strategy to go forward with, so that a whole bunch of follow-up things can happen that we will talk about here. So Margaret, you want to take away from here, or Natalie?
Yeah, so we do have a few slides, not as many as we peppered you in the past, but I'm trying to just, recap where we left things after our January meeting and then really hone in on our the two recommendations or strategies that we've been looking at. So
Did you email that to me or not?
I think Natalie's looking at that.
Oh,
Yeah,
she's gonna do,
I was
let me
gonna
turn on. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
great.
so Natalie, I'll turn it over to you to get us started and then, when I'll kick in.
You
Sounds
should
good.
have,
So now I do have the option to share my screen. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. If anything happens, if you need me to speak louder or more clearly, let me know. But let me do this, play from start. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Do you see the first slide? That's great. Well, it's wonderful to be here with you again and reaching the end of the repositioning, just the first part of the repositioning initiative, which is to look through what options were available to the Needham Housing Authority and what is the best option for the Housing Authority and its federal properties. So as Margaret mentioned, we have just a much shorter presentation than usual, but the idea was to quickly recap where we are today and how we got here. Briefly discuss the guiding principles of development that the Needham Housing Authority has, because these provide a good framework for thinking about which option is the best option for the Needham Housing Authority. And then we'll really dive into comparing what the final two strategies are that we've discussed in the past, but looking just more specifically at those two options. And this will be an opportunity for Margaret will provide commentary about what option the CHA thinks best meets Needham Housing Authority's goal, and Reg will as well. And unfortunately, because Steve was unable to be here today, I will recap Steve's position from our earlier conversations, and then the idea is to go through what some next steps are. Everything essentially after slide 3 is if there's been a consensus around how to move forward, what the next steps are for the Housing Authority. And then talking about in the report that we submitted, there's a section that talks about different capacity requirements that the Housing Authority will need to meet in order to do construction work that uses outside private financing. And so we'll go through that, what it means to partner with a developer and how the Housing Authority can strengthen its negotiating position. And as usual, if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to let me know. I'm happy to stop anywhere.
And it would be fair to say also, if you're playing Steve, when we get to that point of the discussion, there's been several meetings in between since the January 5th board meeting between Margaret and Steve and Natalie, just doing the counterpoint of the pros and cons. And there would have been another one last week, except that had fall off. Go ahead.
That's a great point, Reg. So essentially, all of us have been working on this essentially since the summer of 2021. And that started with the Needham Housing Authority procuring the CHA to look at the different repositioning options that were available or are available to the Needham Housing Authority, and to provide recommendations around which are the best options to proceed with. And so I'm not going to go through this bullet by bullet, but essentially throughout the fall of 2021 and 2022, there's been a couple of really important steps that have been made. One of the most important ones is that there has been training with both NHA board, NHA staff, as well as with residents to go over what a repositioning means and how it could benefit the housing authority and residents. The other item is that in order to get a better sense of the physical conditions of the 3 federal properties of the Needham Housing Authority, that's Cook, Seabeds, and High Rock Estates, the Needham Housing Authority procured through the CHA an architectural team that was led by Dietz and Company to do a thorough property conditions report for each of the 3 federal properties. So that work really started in December of 2021 and has gone through the full year. There's been a lot of analysis that's gone into those property conditions reports. And we now have the final reports for Cook and Seabeds. And then the final report for High Rock Estates, we expect to have done in March. And so that's given the team a good idea of what the physical needs are at the properties and how much it might cost. And so then last fall, what the CHA did was based on the conversations that we had with you as well as with staff throughout 2022, we took the original property conditions assessment report, the conversion assessment report, and updated it to include a section, which is section 5, which includes the final recommendations. And so there were more board meetings that followed that. And here we are now at the start of 2023. And we had a meeting back in January to go through the 2 options that we'll talk about today. But since then, we've also finalized the conversion assessment report, which has been provided to the NHA. So I
I'll
think
just add now, it's not on the slide, but in the interim from the January board meeting to today, we also had a resident meeting with the Seabeds resident community and had a time available for the High Rock community, though not High Rock, Captain Robert Cook community, though we didn't have any attendees.
Jessica came.
Jessica came and took our report. Or took the presentation. And I think that was helpful as well to have the opportunity to engage the residents as well.
Well, and they were very engaged,
So, yes, they were very engaged.
and there are notes to be produced out of that.
Yeah.
So.
And if I may just add one more big milestone that NHA has met, which is related to Linden and Chambers. So an architectural team was selected for the Linden Chambers redevelopment led by Barbman Hendry and Archetype. And that engagement has now fully kicked off in January and is ongoing. And that ties into the guiding principles of development that the board approved in 2021. And so the reason why we wanted to include this here is just to use it as a framework for thinking about how the different options compare to one another and also how they might be able to be used in order to meet the goals that the Needham Housing Authority has for its housing portfolio. So I'm going to highlight some of the most critical ones in terms of this conversion analysis. One is that you want to preserve, extend the lifetime of the existing units that you have by 40+ years. That will require a comprehensive modernization. And then if it's not possible to preserve units for that long, to redevelop worn out or obsolete units, providing an equal amount of replacement units, but also when possible, increasing the number of units. Another goal that the Housing Authority has is to develop additional new affordable units on Needham Housing Authority land to address the critical lack of affordable housing in Needham. to be proactively engaging with residents during the process of modernizing and or redeveloping properties, and to cooperatively work with town boards and staff and other interested parties. Some of the other goals that relate to this conversion analysis is that the target is to provide affordability. So providing housing for households who earn 50% of AMI or less. And the goal is, in doing all of this work, is to make sure that the Needham Housing Authority retains operating management control and governance control over the properties after repositioning. The other items here relate to the quality of the modernization or the goals of the modernization and or redevelopment, to make sure that accessibility is improved at your properties, to make sure that buildings that are 2 stories or 2+ stories have elevators, to comply with Green Needham sustainability goals, and to also be able to leverage a repositioning to provide enhanced resident services.
I would just make a comment, a small nit comment on that. Next time we use that for anybody, we probably will be later this month, we should comply with the Needham climate action plan, because that is in the works and will be before a town meeting, I think, for approval. And so there's a bit of a timing issue here, but that will overtake Green Needham as the sort of way to refer to the town's choices. And it also leads me to just want to comment, by the way, we've been invited to present, we meaning the NHA team and Cambridge Housing team to the select board on the 28th. At their regular meeting, they're giving us 15 or 20 minutes to just do introductions and ask them what they think is important. The planning board is also thinking of doing that, but they have not come up with a date yet.
Great,
And
thanks.
the reason I mentioned this is probably the slide. You know, this is as much detail as we're going to go into for our 15 or 20 minute meeting with them, is that these are the goals of PRI and of the board. So if you think there's anything missing from that, or what I just thought there's a little tweak that needs to be made, please, let me know or let Cheryl know or something.
I have a question about the repositioning of the Captain Robert Cook Drive units. Underneath those units, a lot of those concrete slabs are all trapped underneath. So the house, and you can tell that by the amount of vegetation that's coming out from underneath the houses. I mean, I have trees, literal trees coming out from my house if I don't cut them back. Will those be repaired, or will they be?
We would have to look at,
Because I know you can't see them from.
right, so we'd have,
Very
I mean, we'd have to, investigate and figure out exactly what we could do, but to remedy, but that's really good information, because it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of money fixing above the slab if there's a fundamental flaw or problem below the slab. Now, what that would mean in terms of how we would fix it.
Yeah,
We would
because
have to have an engineer look at it.
supposedly there's been an ongoing mold problem. And I'm just thinking with the crack,
The
I mean,
moisture coming in.
it's gonna, why repeat it?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, no, I
ridiculous.
know, I've heard, I don't know if folks know where Barton Road is in Wellesley.
Yeah,
But when they did that redevelopment back in probably the late 90s now. They just tore it down and kind of rebuilt on the slab, and they never actually fixed the slab.
yeah.
And I know, 10, 15 years ago, when I was here doing High Rock Homes and you all had the management agreement with Wellesley, there were a lot of issues with the with the slab there. And so, I think your point is important for us to know.
Yeah.
So that we can make sure that we really study that and figure it out, because I don't wanna, I don't wanna spend a lot of, I wanna fix what needs to be fixed and then spend the money to upgrade to make sure that we have in place, the right program and the right conditions so that we don't
Yeah,
lose.
that's
the
a
investment.
very important issue over there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, James.
Or, the investigation, for the conditions report, wouldn't that have been picked up at that point?
We had heard specifically at Hierarchy Estates that there were issues or concerns about their slabs, and we did some additional testing there to evaluate. I don't recall us hearing
I don't recall coming up.
at all in Hierarchy, I'm sorry, Captain Robert Cook. And so this would be new information that went undetected by the walkthroughs by the architectural folks, but as I've always said, the best information we get is from the folks who live there. And so I really do appreciate the comment, and it will certainly be something as we move forward with, one, selecting an architect to actually finalize and develop and implement a plan that we would really, do a very hard look at that to make certain that it was addressed, but when we met with Gary and we didn't hear anything. And then, yeah, no,
No, listen, this happened.
yeah, and it's
Guess
not
what?
too late.
2 months from now, something else won't come up like this.
Yep.
And it's not too late.
It's not too late.
So I think we can wait, let's keep going on what we're doing today.
Yep.
Maybe you can, or Natalie can check with, is it bonds or deeds?
Deeds would be
Deeds,
the
yeah, and just ask them if they
If they
looked
picked up
at
anything.
anything.
Yep.
And just make a note to, and not forget about it.
Yep.
When we move to the next stage.
Yeah, and then we'll have, when we do move to the next stage, if we do move to the next stage, then, the engagement, with the residents will really step up, and there'll be lots of opportunities that hopefully would let us not miss, such a key piece of information.
And let me ask a question that is implied by Janice's question, which is, even if there was a problem, would that change any of the conclusions
Yeah.
that we're doing today?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Is it really possible to fix cracked slab without tearing down the building?
I don't know. It depends on what the nature of it is and, and whether there, one of the things we did at High Rock was actually pour through the slab to see what kind of waterproofing, or if they had any waterproofing, because the concerns there is moisture kind of leaping into the units, it seems, from the underground, and we were able to confirm that. For all of the locations we did core, there was, an element of waterproofing there. So that you couldn't, like, say there was a fundamental condition that, was triggering kind of that moisture issue in that way. But it would really be dependent upon what the study found and what the options would be in terms of being able to seal cracks and get the surface to be 100%, in condition to support the activity above. But yeah, if it's, there's a lot of failure there, you might have to do something more. And it could be that they do amazing things now where they lift up the structure of the building to actually then repair.
On jacks, yeah.
On jacks, so. All about, but those would be the kinds of things that we would investigate and evaluate, and would only, and then move forward with the consensus of the board, in terms of that's the right strategy, and then obviously.
But again, back on track for today,
Yeah.
that's just gonna make it more expensive. But it doesn't change any of the conclusions as to option 1B versus option 2.
Right.
Right, okay.
Thank you. But thank you, Janice. I'm glad that you mentioned. All right, Natalie, onward.
Thank you. So essentially, in addition to those guiding principles of development, there are other ways of looking at the benefits of the two repositioning strategies. So One is looking at the economic benefit to the Needham Housing Authority. It's looking at those fair cloth units, which are additional federal subsidies that the Housing Authority can get through some of the repositioning options, and what the benefit of that additional federal subsidy is for redeveloping your state properties or adding new units at High Rock or elsewhere. The ability to meet or to support Needham Housing Authority's mission and the guiding principles of development that we just looked over. What is the timing of economic benefit of the various options? Can you meet the eligibility thresholds? And then finally, the complexity of execution. So those are all different things that we've spoken about over the last year and are going to delve into a little bit more deeply today in evaluating the two options. But here, so essentially, as you know, repositioning is essentially, it relates to your federal properties. So that's Captain Cook, Seabeds, and High Rock Estates. And what it means is essentially you're moving the properties from the Section 9 public housing program to the project-based voucher Section 8 program of HUD. So historically, the Section 9 public housing program has seen a lot of funding cuts and has been underfunded. Which is the main reason why the federal properties have a substantial amount of capital needs. The project-based voucher Section 8 program has historically been better funded. And by doing that conversion from one program to another, essentially the main benefit to the Needham Housing Authority is that it increases the operating revenue that the Housing Authority receives for those properties. And that increase in the operating revenue essentially allows you to better meet your operating costs and then also to pay for a potential modernization of the properties and or redevelopment in the case of High Rock Estates. So the two repositioning strategies that we've kind of honed in on and which are described in greater detail in the conversion assessment report. And Section 5 is really the main section that talks about strategy 1 and then strategy 2. So the first strategy, I'm going to go through it very broadly, and then we're going to get more detail as we describe our different positions related to these two strategies and their benefits. Strategy 1 is the RAD Section 18 blend for Captain Cook, Seabeds, and High Rock Estates. The idea will be to submit a combined application for Cook and Seabeds because there's on adjacent parcels of land, and it'll allow the Housing Authority to qualify for the greatest amount of operating revenue if those two are combined, and it makes sense from a construction perspective. So that's strategy 1. Strategy 2 is the Section 22 streamlined voluntary conversion that will be done all at once for the entire federal public housing portfolio. And so to give you a kind of high level overview, the total added benefit just in terms of the increase in operating income, there would also be an additional administrative fee that the Housing Authority would receive to administer the vouchers that are created under these two options, plus the additional fair cloth subsidy, which is an additional federal operating subsidy, comes out to $2.7 million for strategy 1 and $2.2 million for strategy 2. That is the added economic benefit that will be added to your current income of $1.7 million. The key differences here is that strategy 1 requires construction to occur in order to be able to implement the conversion, whereas strategy 2 begins as soon as the HUD approves the Section 22 application, and then there's a process to implement the conversion. Overall, it would take roughly a year. Both of them based on the property conditions reports that were received, are able to fund 20 years of modernization needs at the federal properties, as long as you use an additional funding resource, that's the low-income housing tax credit program. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. But we also wanted to highlight, because there's the, going back to the guiding principles of the development for the Needham Housing Authority, as well as your concurrent initiative at Linden and Chambers. We just wanted to highlight whether or not the conversion options were able to support 128 unit redevelopment of Linden. And so strategy 1 is able to do that because of the added federal operating subsidy that's created through the RAD Section 18 program. Whereas the strategy 2 Section 22 option cannot fully support the redevelopment of Linden. So that's just a general quick overview. On the next slide here.
Just ask a question, just for the, again, for the record, go back to this previous slide. So all of these numbers here are per year or annual numbers, right? So
They're
the
per-
increase is 2.784 million per year into the future, is that right?
That's right.
And secondly, it isn't actually 2.784 million per year into the future. That number will increase with inflation adjustment formulas tied to the increase in fair market value rents. Is that right? Or at least a portion of that will, maybe.
Yeah, you would be subject to annual increases to your contract, and at times, you know, that will be determined by, you know, usually there's a rent increase factor that HUD issues called the OCAF. That usually keeps a pace with fair market, but sometimes it doesn't. Fair market can go higher, but you're initially capped at the OCAF percentage. And then if for some reason, and it hasn't happened in our market, there was a rent depression, then, you know, you would be subject to fair market reasonable studies at that point, but we've never seen that in the Boston market.
So I've been trying to come up a level from there. Just again, I'm thinking this is a recording that is going to be useful in the future for people to look at. Would it be fair to say that the 2.784 million and the 2.282 million will grow roughly consistent with inflation,
It will grow at
with
a-
your caveats that you just,
it will grow at, even with my caveats, I can say it will grow at a higher level than what you would experience on the public housing
which
side.
was my next question, it will grow faster than the 1.74
Correct,
million.
correct.
It'll outpace it.
It will outpace it. And then I just wanted to comment on the comment on the ability to fund 20 years of modernization needs at federal developments. That's not answering the question of how to fund the redevelopment at High Rock Homes Estate, where the hope is to tear down single family homes and replace them with duplexes. It's really, if it would, the answer yes to that question is if you just replace them in kind. You know, I think there's gonna be a funding, a strategy available when we're ready to move forward with High Rock Homes Estate. But it's gonna require a lot more outside resources than just the repositioning, but that's the same on either column.
So
I
that
just didn't want to misrepresent that. You could think getting not only, you know, fully renovated seabeds in Captain Robert Cook, but I'm also getting my grand vision on High Rock Home Estate.
So the caption for that second to last row is really, when it says, tax credits, it's really principally addressing seabeds and Cook.
Yeah, and then if you ever were wanting to just do a refresh at High Rock Homes, you would be able to do that as well based on the map, but you would not be able to do a tear down rebuild.
So that last line is, yes, it has a 2 million surplus. It says, yes, that is to support the 128 unit redevelopment that
Yeah.
Linden Chambers, or the High Rock
Yeah.
Estates redevelopment,
Yeah.
or a start down that road.
Right, because you'll have the surplus that would be able to start moving in that direction.
Decisions that need to be made in the future.
Yeah.
The next year or two.
I just have a question about the last line. So the 2 million surplus versus the 4.9 million shortfall. Is that because the 2.7 million is higher than the 2.2 million, or where does that
It
come from?
really relies on the additional fair cloth subsidy dollars where you're able to bring in to Linden and Chambers, the federal public housing operating subsidy. That it will increase the amount of income that's available to the housing authority to operate. So between the resident rent and the state public housing operating subsidy that you get for Linden and Chambers, it works out to about $5,400 per unit per year. And that number is actually well below what a private or for-profit or nonprofit affordable housing provider usually benchmarks for the cost of operating affordable housing. Typically it would be in the $8,000 to $9,000 range. And so for you to attract any kind of equity or debt financing to the project, you need to be able to show that you can actually sufficiently operate it. And so the fair cloth subsidy helps bridge that gap and actually gives you a little bit more that you can borrow against, which is why it's, you end up with a surplus in that column versus the section 22, where you don't have those fair cloth units and you basically have to start at that $5,400 operating subsidy threshold and try to build a redevelopment program off of that. So it really is the federal public housing operating subsidy that's the key factor there.
And I just have another question on the strategy one, when it says revenue stream doesn't start until construction financing is closed. So it would start when the financing is closed, not when the construction is done, is that right?
Correct, right. So, you would need to have Captain Robert Cook and Seabeds move into construction. They would, and on the day that we do the financing and construction starts, their rents would go automatically up. And then what you would put into the bank is the opportunity to, at some future date, reactivate those federal public housing operating subsidies. They would be reactivated at the point in time when Linden and Chambers was, you would start construction there. When you would go to lease them up, those subsidy dollars would then be reactivated. And those dollars would become available again to the housing authority.
We said the rents will go up. Is that because they're gonna get more money from the Fed or not the residents?
No, so on all of these deals, and it's key, thank you, Janice, for letting us say this, because we can't say it enough, the resident rent structure for the federal properties doesn't change. The way the resident rents are calculated on the public housing program is the same that in the way they're calculated under the Section 8 program on the project-based voucher program. So when I talk about the rent increase, it's the rent or the subsidy that the housing authority will receive from HUD and not the amount that the resident will pay.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, no,
Just
but
thought
no,
of that.
that's such an important component. And we, in the report, we have a number of slides where we answer that very question, but it is really key. The rent structure is absolutely the same on the federal public housing side as it is on the Section 8 side. And it's all based on 30% of your income. One of that.
I just have one last question. So on the paper copy of the slides,
Yeah.
it lists these two strategies, but they're and they're gray, and then it also lists what it says: strategy 1, RAD, Section 18 blend for Cook Seabeds, and Section 18 for High Rock Estates. And I know can you just remind me why we're not considering that one? again?
So we're doing a RAD blend in Brad blend section 18, where we're doing 20% Brad and 80% section 18. We looked really hard at the possibility of doing 100% section 18. And the math just, it's either very, very close, or the case can't be made, because HUD really limits you to looking at what work absolutely needs to happen in the next 3 years. And so Captain Robert Cook just squeaks by a little bit, but then, you know, Seabeds is much further below. And so when you combine the two together and do the blend, you actually end up getting more section 18 units combined than you would if you were just to move forward with Captain Robert Cook as a section 18. We did the extra investigatory work at High Rock Homes, because again, we were really close to that threshold number that HUD looks at to make you eligible. And we thought maybe we would be able to pick up something more with the slab construction, or something more with the building envelopes. And right now, at least the preliminary information we got from deeds, and again, they're working on the final report, was that it wasn't going to change the math enough for us to feel like we could spend a year submitting the application and arguing with HUD, but we're so close that it could go either way. And so we're going to keep that option open, because we're only going to initially apply for Cooks and Seabeds. And so if we get better information, or the information changes that would push High Rock into section 18, we would know that. But it still would be very beneficial for High Rock to go the blend, because you get the 80-20 split. But if we can get 100%, you know, obviously we would prefer that economically. But it's just very, very close for right now. It just doesn't make sense to, you know, we just didn't have the confidence that we'd be successful with the application. And, you know, at this point, I've done 9 section 18 applications. I've gotten everyone approved. I withdrew one, in fairness. You know, that was a political decision. We would have won if we stayed. And so because I have that kind of track record, I just don't, you know, my assessment of it is that it's not robust enough for me to tell you could be successful on that one. And it certainly is even less so when you look at Captain Robert Cook and Seabeds. And again, by combining them together and doing option 1, you actually end up as a housing authority in a better position.
A couple more questions. That middle one where it says revenue stream does not start until construction financing is closed. Just to be clear, that applies to the Seabeds Cook application. So the moment we start having shovels going in the ground at Seabeds Cook, then that stream goes up.
That income goes up.
But it's only the Seabeds Cook portion of it.
Yeah.
And the High Rock Estates portion of it doesn't go up until we can get at least some of those units going through, you know, construction to tear them down and put duplexes there.
Right.
Or whatever we do. Right.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
And one more thing, what's 4.9 million shortfall mean here? Above it says we are taking care of the 20-year needs of Seabeds and Cook. So what is short here?
So then, you know, so the difference between strategy 1 and strategy 2, when we look at it in terms of its ability to help support the plans at Linden and Chambers, strategy 1 supports it fully. You can not only renovate Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook, you will have the extra, you know, have the Faircloth units plus some extra money that can then help support 128 unit redevelopment at Linden and Chambers. So much so that you end up, when that project is done, with a $2 million surplus.
That's an annual surplus?
No, it's just a one-time, it's a capital surplus. Where if you do section 22, yes, you'd be able to do Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook, but you would not have enough resources to actually do the 128 unit redevelopment at Linden Chambers. You'd have close to a $5 million shortfall.
I think maybe what's confusing is why isn't the $2 million shortfall? How does it become a $5 million shortfall?
Oh, I mean, let's see how to say this. So the fact that. So there's extra capital money left over from Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook that goes into underwriting Linden and Chambers. So that you eliminate the $4.9 million shortfall. And after you do that, you still have $2 million left over. So Linden and Chambers, it's I kind of think about it as kind of a cross collateralization, that once you finish Linden and Chambers, or as you're finishing or working through Linden and Chambers, it's going to have additional resources that those properties don't need, that will come to Needham Housing Authority, for Needham Housing Authority then to use at Linden and Chambers. And in fact, it will have so much, it will even have leftover money that could go and do something else.
Again, as we reuse the slide and this decision here, I think it would be a little clearer if it said yes with 2 dashes, provides a 2.9 million capital contribution and has sort of off a $2 million surplus.
Yep.
If that's, or however that should be worded
Sure.
to be accurate.
Yep.
So that, you have, because I think you look at that and say,
How
where's the other 2.9?
Yeah. No, but it really is that, well, both of them give some money. It's just that strategy one covers the $4.9 million shortfall and gives you $2 million. So you could say it's a $6.9 million surplus. But you're using 4.9 to pencil out the Linden and Chambers deal.
Right. Let's go on if nobody has any other questions.
I just had, sorry, one other question.
Sure.
So I understand, so with the strategy 2, the revenue stream begins sooner than strategy 1. And I guess I'm having trouble formulating my question. I guess my question is, like, what, so there would be, so strategy 1, it would start, say, how many years later? Or like when would be, if you had to estimate, like.
Okay, so, for strategy 1, for Cook and Seabeds, we would hope to be in construction by the end of 2024.
Oh, okay, so it's not.
And then, but then as Reg said, High Rock Homes would come later.
Right.
And, in that, I know at some point, we mapped out where it would come a little later, it might be 2027 or 2026, depending on the timing. And you would hold, you wouldn't pick up that extra income right away until you closed on the construction of High Rock Homes. But for Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook, the idea would be to move forward, hiring the architect, starting the design work so that construction would start by the end of 2024, and you would pick up that increase right then, which actually, would be just, in line with or a few months behind when we would pick it up on option 2.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks.
And let's go to the key differences now, because I think that might, want to answer some additional questions you have rumbling in your heads, but also maybe generate some, some additional questions as well.
Yeah.
So do you want me to take over strategy 1 and you're going to do strategy 2?
Sure, that sounds great.
And part of, our thoughts here, and just want to give Reg credit. Steve and I have been meeting pretty regularly because we have differing opinions about this, and we want to be open and transparent about that, and particularly with Steve not here. And he really has, caused me and my team and, us at the Cambridge Housing Authority, to really think through our recommendation really hard. And I really can't tell you how much I appreciate him doing that, because, both of us are, we've worked together many years ago. He worked with, at the Cambridge Housing Authority, and I was the project manager on one of his properties. So we go way back, and we have an enormous amount of respect him, and I know he has similar feelings for me. So when Steve talks, I listen, kind of thing. And so we've been trying, doing these discussions to try to see if we could get to a point where we would have a united recommendation to the board. Maybe we would have gotten there on Wednesday when we talked or not, we don't know, but we want to make sure his voice and his opinion is represented. So Natalie's going to do section 2, and we've talked about, the things that Steve really has impressed upon us in the process. And again, his opinion, his assessment, I think are really important for you to hear, as well as to hear mine. But I'm doing the section 1 strategy, which is the portfolio wide Brad section 18 blend. And to, explain why, that in how it, best meets your needs and how it furthers not only your goals and objectives for your federal portfolio, your public housing federal portfolio, but how it can slide into and really benefit your efforts on trying to write and improve your state public housing portfolio as well. And so, we've talked already on strategy 1 that, it requires, you can't begin benefiting from the higher rents until you actually close on the construction. You're closing on the construction and conversion simultaneously. And it's funny, one of the things, we heard at the resident meetings at Seabeds was they were asking about that. Well, what's the difference? And they sees really on it. And I don't know whether it's fair to say, the residents felt kind of, and so on some level, the idea that they can count on the fact that construction and improvements will happen at their sites as part of the conversion. I think some folks found value in that, because then they know that their housing is going to be improved. Where at section 22, you will have the resources to improve their housing, but you don't have the firm requirement or the trigger, the fact that it has to happen as part of the conversion. So the only way HUD will approve the conversion under option 1 is if the housing authority can and will be able to just demonstrate a rock solid plan on how it could meet the capital needs and operation needs of Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook for it at a minimum the next 20 years. And you have to prove out with the math, here's what we have to do on day 1 with construction. And then here's what we have to put in the bank for the rest of the next 20 years to make sure that we can cover the operating cost needs as well as the capital needs, where option 2 does not have that requirement. Again, it gives you the resources that you could do it, but it doesn't mandate or necessitate that you do it as part of your closing. So to some extent, in a I don't want to put words into residents' mouths, but I think there was some like, oh, that, there's some insurance there, that the housing authority is going to do the work and is going to do the right scope of work. Just again, to be clear, you're not going to see the increase until you actually do the conversion and you've met HUD's requirements on the 20-year piece. And, from an industry standard, I really appreciate HUD actually making housing authorities prove that, because, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is protect and preserve these affordable housing units. And part of your ability to protect and preserve them is to make good, solid financial decisions that are really looking at the physical conditions, needs, and operational needs of the property, and not to shortchange it and say, all right, I can get a lot of money today, but I'm not going to do, I'm not necessarily thinking about the fact that is it enough money to actually, meet the property needs. The economic benefits, again, when you get all of the elements rolled out from, the higher rents with Captain Robert Cook and Seabeds, down the road, when you get the higher rents for Captain Robert Cook and Seabeds, and then when you get the higher rents at High Rock Homes down the road, plus when you put in play the federal public housing operating subsidies that you would get from the section 18 portion of the strategy. This option gives the housing authority long-term the highest revenue stream. And again, it gives you those fair cloth, those new federal operating subsidies that are, I think, are really key and essential to your ability to make an inroads at Linden and Chambers in particular, but also potentially to, support the idea of replacing the single family homes up at High Rock Home Estates. So when we analyze it against your goals that was in that earlier slide, it allows for the comprehensive renovation of cooks and seabeds. It provides the operating and capital funding to support a program that would see 72 units at Linden replaced with 128 units. So you solve that problem. And then it provides operating funding to replacement units at High Rock Homes Estates. Actually, I think that should be Linden and Chambers. So yeah, I think we made a typo there. So it also provides of the 128 new units at Linden and Chambers, 72 would be replacing the existing units, and you'll have 54 new units. And of those 54, 42 of them would be deeply affordable to people who have incomes at, or, below 50% of AMI, or at any percent, they would be, deeply affordable means it would be no more than 30% of their income for rent. The balance, the 12 units, would be affordable to individuals who are between 50 and 60% of area median income. So they're not those deeply affordable ones. They're still affordable, but they're just not as affordable as the deeply affordable
In other
ones.
words, mixed income.
I would say it's still all affordable housing because affordable housing is anything at 80% of area median income or below. But what would happen is that the family or the resident who would move into that would have the rent would be fixed based on the rent, the 60% of area median income rent. So I don't have the exact number, but say you would have to pay and have enough income to be able to pay $1,500 a month for your apartment, for that apartment, and you would not get an operating subsidy for that. So you'd have to have enough income to support that rent, and that rent is affordable to somebody who's in that 50 to 60% of area median income range. It's just not what we typically see in public housing or Section 8 housing, where the rent is based off of 30% of.
So that unit wouldn't be subsidized.
It would not be subsidized,
Okay.
so it would, you would have to structure the selection of the units to find somebody who fell in that 50 to 60% of area
And
median.
can I just add on to that?
Yeah.
Does that mean that the units that are subsidized opposed to the ones that aren't may have better construction?
No, they would be absolutely the same. You wouldn't be able to tell.
Okay.
And you wouldn't actually, from a resident neighborhood standpoint, you wouldn't be able to tell whose unit was the $1,500 unit and whose unit was,
And how would they be? Would they be positioned all,
yeah, just scattered. Yeah. you
In
would
fact,
not-
it wouldn't be the same unit every time, right? In other words, or would you,
It may need to, and that adds a complexity. I mean, is if you usually have to designate a unit one way or the other. But you'd only have 12 of these. And, and that's, you'll hear in a moment that if the number of those units to try to even come close to penciling out the deal at Linden and Chambers on the Section 22 has a lot more of those just straight non-subsidized low-income housing tax credit units. So I prefer not to do those types of units because the folks who reside on housing authorities waiting lists are typically folks who are at 50% of area median income or below. And so for a housing authority who's doing new development to do just tax credits without the subsidy, doesn't serve your population. So, I really strive to do that, but you've got to, when you're putting together the financing, particularly with the state redevelopment project, the ability to attract those operating subsidies are really challenged. You're really challenged to get that, which is why the availability or the units that you would get from Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook are so invaluable to the redevelopment plans for Linden and Chambers, because absent that resource, your ability to actually get units to be deeply affordable is much more constrained.
The duplexes that now exist in High Rock. Is that the financial setup there?
The financial setup at High Rock currently is its federal public housing operating subsidy. So it's, federal public housing. So the rent is still based on 30% of a person's income. But the housing authority gets very little extra, operating subsidies from the federal government to cover the difference.
Excuse me, Ross, this isn't a public hearing,
No,
so
I have a question.
I know, as
What
I
is
said,
this?
it's not a public hearing.
Part of the board package. This is from a different date, January 6th or 5th, and that is from several days ago. So,
So if you want a copy of that afterwards, certainly we'll get you one, okay? All right,
okay,
Another question.
you don't have copies?
Here at Needham, we have, what we call the flat rate rent program. Now, would that also go away?
Is it, the flat rent is the ceiling rent, is right?
Yeah,
That is something that would, for the families that are higher earning.
they would
Right,
go in that.
they would,
those other units.
they would go, anyone who's on the flat rent would see their rent over time adjusted to the new Section 8 rent.
Yeah,
But it would never exceed a person's income. But 30% of a person's income, but there are some families, and it's just a handful of, I think mostly families, not individual house, elders. But who benefit from their flat rate, and so they're actually paying, as a percentage of their income, something below 30%. It could be, in Cambridge, we've had families who are paying just 10% of their income because they're on the flat rent.
yeah.
And what we've done in Cambridge, and this would be something the board to consider if it were to go in this direction, would be to phase in that rent increase to those families over a 3 to 5 year period, so they wouldn't have the jump from 10% of their income to 30% of their income.
Okay,
right
so
away.
not to, place a, it's a burden.
Immediate burden, but right now they are benefiting more so than their other neighbors because they're paying as a percentage of their income with the flat rent much lower than 30% or lower than the 30%. I don't know if it's much lower or exactly what it would be, but they've been the beneficiary of that. But again, being mindful of it, you can't just all of a sudden say to somebody, oh, you've been paying 10 or 15%, but now you have to pay 30%. I think people would need to, have some, I would certainly recommend that we have some transition period that would help them adjust to, over a course of 3 to 5 years, adjust to that higher income.
Okay, thank you.
so shall we have Natalie present the other side?
Yep, Natalie, you're on.
Thank you. This feels a little bit like a panel debate, and Steve has prepared me well. So I think one of the main items that makes strategy, so Steve really pushed us to consider strategy 2 and its benefits compared to strategy 1 that Margaret just went through. What the Section 22 streamlined voluntary conversion does is it's a much simpler and easier process to implement at the start. So it's something that's available as of right to the housing authority because it has 250 units of public housing, less than that. It does not require construction to occur in order to essentially have the housing authority receive that increased operating income of the $2.28 million annually. what that allows the housing authority to do is there's not as much pressure to go right into construction. So the housing authority will have a little bit more time and choice on the degree of the level of construction that it wants to pursue at the different properties. And generally, the feeling was that while the property conditions report, they have different degrees of construction. So most immediate, medium term, long term, that we could get the properties at the Needham Housing Authority, the federal properties, up to a good standard without having to do to essentially show 20-year viability for those properties. The other thing is, so as Margaret mentioned, Section 22 does allow for a comprehensive renovation of cook and seabeds. It does not, provide the full amount of funding that's necessary to have a 128 unit new construction project at Linden pencil out. But the feeling is that the state will be able to, because that's a state public housing property, that the state should be able to find resources to make a redevelopment of those two properties possible. And that the way that the Faircloth works is that once that is liberated through the conversion of seabeds and cook, you need to apply it at other units that meet REACT standards in order to get that added benefit of the new federal operating subsidy. And there have periodically been attempts to repeal the Faircloth limit in DC. They have been unsuccessful, but that ultimately, if you do Section 22, that's funding that you could receive now that is more certain than the added benefit of those new federal operating subsidies through the Faircloth program.
And then I would just add, I reference, at, when you looked at the 128 unit redevelopment at Linden and Chambers, when I did the pro forma to see what we could do under Section 22, we had two issues. One, we didn't have enough operating subsidy to support more deeply affordable units. So more of the units had to switch into those LIHTC unsubsidized units. So instead of having 116 deeply subsidized units as we did on option one, we only had 92 deeply subsidized units under option number two, so that you would end up with more of those units where you would need to have households who could support, a $1,500 a month rent, which is, contrary again to the folks who are on Needham Housing Authority's waiting list, or many housing authorities waiting list. So the lack of having those Faircloth units mean you're not able to provide those deeply operating subsidies. And then the other reality of the Section 22 was that even if you were willing to say, all right, we'll have 92 is better than 72. We've increased affordability to 128. It may not be our exact population. You don't have enough capital dollars to actually make the project work. So you have, a combined effect of you don't have enough operating subsidy to fully achieve your goals, but you don't have enough capital money to actually pencil out the redevelopment at, the 128 unit redevelopment at Linden and Chambers.
But Steve might say, would you have enough to do a smaller phase one redevelopment at the Chambers?
And the answer there was yes.
Which would be just 28 units, the ones that are north of the parking lot.
Yeah.
And that would go to 50 or 60 units. That would.
Yeah.
That we would be able to.
Yeah, and that's why we were able to move forward with selecting the architect. And what we were doing to make the numbers work there was really leaning into, the Section 8 operating subsidy that Needham has available that it can project base. So we would have 12 of Needham Housing Authority Section 8 vouchers supporting the new units, and then you would get 8 from DHCD. And that's, those 20 Section 8 vouchers are enough to help a 62 unit development to work. The fair cost kind of substitutes out some of those, but then underwrites the affordability of the state public housing units and allows the deal for a bigger deal to pencil out, which is then why now we've been showing not only the 62 unit option as a phase one, but potentially the 128.
Because we've been doing that 62 units, 28 to 62.
Yeah, for a while now.
For many years.
Yeah.
And last year, this time, that was
Yep.
all you saw. You know, reasonably visible in the funding layer cake.
Yeah, we hadn't made the jump of fair cloth, that what the fair cloth
Right.
units would do to bring in.
That hadn't been brought into bear.
Right, because we hadn't gotten to that point of the assessment.
And I want to just confirm, we were before the CPC getting on Wednesday, getting actually grilled pretty thoroughly, impressively, I think, you know, in a good way. Margaret was impressed on the quality of,
The quality of the questions was outstanding.
and this was something that came out, which is how now you're talking about a 128 unit thing. So that basically is all of the low rise, 18 low rise Linden buildings, street buildings. And you're now saying, now that we're at the end of our analysis, and if we go with option one, then there is, you know, nothing's guaranteed in this life, but, you know, there's a, you know, a visibility on a path that would to a sort of larger phase one. Still wouldn't be the whole Linden Chambers, but it would be all of the Linden street buildings if possible.
And I would just add, you know, like one of the things, you know, is that, I mean, I've heard this from a number of housing authorities where they say, well, it really is for the state to solve the state public housing problem. You know, they've got to come up with the funding. And they've got to figure out how they can make the investment in the properties. And I've been waiting for that for 30 years.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, I mean, in Cambridge, and that was funny, Steve and I had a whole conversation. We used to have, you know, when we would go up to, you know, lobby at the State House for public housing, we had these Save State Public Housing. It's a resource worth saving buttons that we had that Cambridge actually made because we had a similar portfolio that was in such disrepair as what you have at Linden and Chambers. You know, we were gonna start losing units if we didn't figure out how to reinvest. So I've been working on state public housing issues for 30 years. Cambridge ended up using what you guys used at High Rock Homes, where you converted the 60 single-family homes in 2010 or 12 to the federal public housing units. And I remember Pam Allen was the executive director at the time, and she was one of just a handful of housing authority directors and even housing authority as the board to actually take advantage of that opportunity. Other housing authorities were like, no, too complicated for us, or, you know, my husband worked at a housing authority with just 100 federal public housing units, and I was on him every day. You got to do this, you got to do this. I'm like, oh, I've mentioned it to my boss, but we already have plans for our capital funds, so we don't want to do it. And, you know, Cambridge did all of it. And then that's been the platform of then how we've been able to then use the federal resources to, you know, complete, you know, several $100 million of renovation there. And so you can wait for the state, and you can continue to wait and wait and wait, or you can try to make something happen for yourself. And what the fair cloth units to me does, it gives you more resources to bring to the table that actually will then bring the state to the table. Because one, they won't need to give you as much to make the numbers work, but two, they're also potentially, you know, on the scenario, getting out of having to come back ever again, because you've now figured out how not only to take care of your most immediate, you know, your immediate needs, but you've actually righted it so you don't have to be dependent upon the state program ever again to meet the needs of that. And they feel like if they can get more properties like that to happen, it's worth them to make those investments. And they've done that, they've done that recently in Chelsea and Somerville. They came to the table back in 2010. I don't really know what you guys got. Cambridge got about $3 million to convert its state public housing portfolio. I think Springfield got the jackpot of like $8 million or something, but it's worth it to the state for them to help a housing authority use a federal resource to slip into in the particularly the public housing operating subsidy resource to slip into state public housing. And they will really do, backflips to help you use that subsidy. And to me, that's when I look at trying to solve both, how are you going to have enough money to operate the properties, but how are you also going to attract the capital dollars to make it work? That's the tool that has I can't even tell you how much power it has for you.
Can I ask Natalie or Steve over there? Could I ask you to, Steve, to
Respond.
yeah, because, I think there's a burden in dimension of section 22. There's execution risk. We're just a small, middling size housing authority doing the best we can. We're not Cambridge Housing Authority. There's what would you say to, give us a get real here to address Margaret's vision that she just so eloquently articulated there. It's like a debating, anybody been on a debating team, and you get to argue both sides here.
So I think it comes down to what you just said, Reg, which is ultimately the housing authority can make a decision today that it would get 2.28 million annually, year by year, starting as soon as you've put in the application, it's been approved by HUD, and you do the implementation. All takes roughly 12 months. But that 2.28 million, that is certain once the whole process is complete. I think, in terms of the RAD Section 18 blend, it does depend on construction happening. So in terms of the risk there to manage is making sure that you can get the funding that you need in order to be able to meet that 20-year viability test that Margaret described earlier. That requires getting the 4% low-income housing tax credit equity. It also requires taking out a permanent mortgage. And to do that, the housing authority is a small housing authority, and it would have to show ability to meet liquidity or and guarantee requirements that may be very difficult for the housing authority to meet. And so in order to attract that funding, likely the housing authority would need to partner with the developer. And so the risk is you need to get the funding in place, and then also you need to get a developer in place, and that's a negotiation. So these developer owner relationships can look very different from project to project, but depending on how much leverage that you have in terms of negotiating strength, if one of the hopes of the housing authority is to maintain local control, that's something that is going to have to negotiate very hard to maintain. So, I think that, I hope that that's that I've done Steve justice in terms of how he would have responded to that question.
What would you say, Steve? And Steve and all of us, Cheryl was there too at the Seabeds tenant meeting. We packed the conference room more than I've ever seen it. What would you say though, the interesting, I was impressive question that we got from, I forget who was asked the question, that under option 2, there isn't that concrete, absolute incentive to move forward and fix these buildings up to the 20-year standard. And the risk that, we would get, sure, we'd get the money right away when the application is approved. But, you know, it doesn't sort of produce as much long-term benefit because, you know, of the requirement to start construction.
In other words, phases. Things would be done in phases.
It basically, we don't have to do all of the 20 years. You can do just the 1 to 3 year stuff and stop there and, you know, keep the
Keep the
revenue
extra
stream
money and just, you know, use it at,
for something else.
for something else.
How would you address that? You know, it was a very interesting question that actually, at least from that, was it Richard who asked the question? I
I
think it
think
was.
so.
Yeah.
And it actually was, it came from a couple different ways it came out.
Yeah.
As, and I was really impressed that they got that new.
They understood,
Yeah.
you know, from just that presentation.
Yeah. I'm glad they did, because I mean, that is an important consideration.
Go ahead, Ed.
Does, excuse me, do municipal bonds factor into this conversation at all?
In terms of bonds that the town of Needham might issue.
Yeah.
It could be a factor in, I would love it to be a factor. I've been trying to get municipal bonds allocated to housing for a while now, but oftentimes, you know, I can only speak to my experience in Cambridge, and maybe it would be different in Needham. Cambridge, when we broached that idea with them, said that they did not want to have the city's bonding capacity impacted by the housing authority. They have, you know, a bunch of schools they needed to do, and they had a bunch of this they needed to do, and even though we would have our own revenue stream to support the issuance of the bonds, to lessen that burden, they did not want to take on any kind of added financial responsibility or risk because of the other bonding needs in the community. And so then they then said, you know, didn't want to continue to have any kind of
But
conversation.
it's a possibility
Yes.
worth exploring.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Reg and I've had that conversation. The housing authorities as well can issue bonds on their own behalf. It's just that we don't have the rating as strong as, you know, I'm sure the town of Needham's rating is. And, you know, the city of Cambridge rating is exceptional because of all of the tech activity and businesses. But because you know, if you can access, particularly in an environment where interest rates are going up, the interest rate that a town with a good credit rating gets, you know, that buys you more, and that would be lovely. But yeah, you know, it's certainly a conversation worth having. It just hasn't had a lot of traction in the experience yet, but we'd love it to.
Well, Ed, you know, from the housing plan working group, that towards the end, they started to focus, but ran out of time on the Needham Affordable Housing Trust, which is a creature of the town. And other affordable housing trusts in other towns have used town borrowing capacity to do things via their affordable housing trust. We have not done that sort of thing at all. I've thought about that kind of thing in Needham. But the League of Women Voters is studying now the role and function and governance and mission of Needham Affordable Housing Trust. It's going to have a report later, you know, in a few months, and we'll be soliciting public input. And, you know, the concept of a stronger, more proactive affordable housing trust, Needham Affordable Housing Trust, partnering with the Needham Housing Authority, which, though we are obviously separate, we are a creature of the town of Needham. We were formed by town meeting. Actually, Margaret reminded me, and I need to say this,
Yeah,
Wednesday,
we just have to have a party.
it's our 75th anniversary this spring of our formation.
Yeah, I was just when I was getting ready for the CPA year, and you know, we had a slide that says formed in 1948. And so sometimes I just like to comment on the number of years that a housing authority has been in a community, because you know, it's such an evidence of long-term commitment to your community. And so I was quickly doing the math before the meeting, and it's like, it's a milestone year. So I'm like, Reg, come on.
Well, where were the units that were built in 48?
Well, they have been renovated since then. Go ahead,
So I have a
elevator.
question for Natalie. So you mentioned about the about the the, unit, something about meeting React standards, and can you talk about that? And I guess, I'm guessing that is the. Anyway, if you could just explain what that is and what that, and how. If there's like a time limit for that requirement or whatever.
Yeah, sure. So essentially what it is that, so you have the federal operating subsidy that's generated through the RAD Section 18 blend, the 108 units. And so when you close on Captain Cook and Seabeds, you essentially get some of that. I think Margaret mentioned it as the federal operating subsidy that goes back into kind of the NHA bank that you can then use somewhere else. But in order to essentially activate that Faircloth unit, you need to have a unit that you're putting it into. And that unit that you're putting into needs to meet REACT standards. And that then allows you to get the operating subsidy from that Faircloth unit.
Remind everybody what meeting React standards mean.
So I'm not sure I know exactly what the full name of the acronym is. And
Real
Margaret,
estate assessment center.
Yeah. I was gonna say that. Real estate
Yeah.
assessment.
and so these are, my understanding is that it's essentially standards that a unit meets in order to qualify as essentially a Section 9 public housing unit.
So when a lot of housing authorities added to the federal public housing program as part of our, the reason why DHCD had to give everybody a little bit of money is that everybody had to do a little bit of work for their units to meet REACT, or in some instances, a lot of work for their units to meet, their state public housing units to meet REACT. So our sense is that Linden, you're not going to meet REACT. That there might be a possibility that Chambers with a little bit could meet REACT. But, you absolutely would meet REACT with a brand new unit, that would meet REACT requirements.
I think of it this way, which is, it's a set of standards for the quality and condition of the properties and so forth. So going back to that 2013-12 Pam Allen example
Yeah.
of converting to the federal program, which was so advantageous for us. Cheryl was there with us when we did that too. Part of the reason that many housing authority executive directors, I guess including your husband, I did not know that, said, boy, this is too much trouble, is you actually had to you had to bring everything up to a certain standard and get an inspection and prove that you met those standards to be able to federalize, is what we call the 60 remaining high rock estates units. So
it's not that there's a deadline to do it, but you just, in order to get that additional
it's one of the things you
amount,
have to
you have
do.
to. It's
But-
not, but it won't disappear.
But if we're building new units, they'll easily meet it.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
so one of the things that Steve expressed was, well, could Faircloth just be eliminated? Could HUD basically say, if you don't have it built, it doesn't matter that you have authority to add units. We don't want you, we're gonna say, no. And there is risk. I mean, there's always risk, there's appropriation risk. I mean, I've heard nothing, and, I went back to, my executive director of Cambridge Housing Authority to see if he heard anything about efforts to actually eliminate, what I've heard is the opposite, which is to actually, remove the cap and allow housing authorities similar to what we had in 2010 in the ARA bill, the ability to add new federal public housing units. And really the last time, absent the ARA funds, that happened was in the time of, I think we did the last redevelopment project in Cambridge was in the 1997. Was the last time we actually put new federal public housing units into service. Up until now. Now we have Faircloth units in Cambridge, so we're actually, adding 303 new units this year. Construction starting this year using our Faircloth authority. And HUD has come up with an actual program now that basically has you work, both to add the public housing units, but then transfer them immediately over to the RAD program. And so they are doing numerous deals across the country And they set up a framework for this to happen, which gives me at least hope that the program's not gonna go away or go, you know, the value of it is being identified, you know, at HUD to add these number of affordable housing units.
Is there a model of this program that we can further?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole guidebook that HUD has, that I can
No, I
send.
mean, has it been done in any other town?
Cambridge has done it, Medford is
I know you
doing it.
said you were adding the fair cost units now, but
Yeah,
are there any programs that have been completed?
well, we've closed on the financing in construction with one of our two projects already, so we've gone through all of the steps that you would need to do, you know, absent, and so now the contractor's on site, I can show you the construction is going. All the financing was put in place with that, with actually accessing and utilizing our fair cost
Your fair
units.
cost, and what about extra funds
From
from
DA.
beyond
From-
federal or DHCD?
I mean, again, you know, we've done a number, and other housing authorities have done a number of tax credit and equity projects that.
What about developers?
There are developers who do it all the time. I mean, there, you know, there's more developers who do it actually than.
I mean,
housing
for the
authorities.
financing?
Yeah.
May I jump in here? I've been suggesting that we're a little bit overdue for a bio break and we should take a 5 or 10 minute break and reconvene here. If this is a good,
I think,
Place.
and then, because I do want to circle back because I want to talk a little bit about what it means to do low-income housing tax credits and the capacity issues.
okay, so let's
That's a good
do a
segue.
quick bio break in case there's anybody else like me sort of sitting here thinking about it.
That includes you too, Natalie. You can have a break.
Fortunately,
Thanks.
the restroom is right outside the door here, so. And his leg stretched as well.
About some meat.
Margaret, I think we should do debate club more often. It's kind of fun.
I was on the debate team in high school.
I can tell you're good.
So Margaret, I've heard, if we go the route of the developer, there's a possibility if we can't meet our burden that the developer might just say, well, we don't want to do the Section 8 program anymore, and they throw all the residents out.
No, they wouldn't do that because one, there would be,
Yeah.
you know, when you convert, HUD
I didn't.
converts, it puts a use agreement on it, requiring that the units continue to be, or the, you know, the land and the units continue to be, subject to, low-income housing affordability and the like. And then on top of that, the Needham Housing Authority would put on its own affordability restriction that would require the developer to,
You talking the town of Needham?
the housing authority
Yeah.
could do it. I mean, the housing authority should do it. The town wouldn't really have a right to do it unless their funding came in as a loan,
Yeah,
and then they could do something on top of it. But, you know, when we get into these types of transactions, whether it's in Cambridge or, you know, the other housing authorities that we work with, what I always do is kind of a belt and suspenders approach to make certain that we layer a lot of different
yeah.
ways to protect, you know, because ultimately, my job, my goal, my HUD's requirement is that I protect your homes.
Yeah.
And so I like to make sure I kind of build up a layer of protection.
Is there any, any type of, like a stopgap that,
Well, it's
Be put
it's
in
really
place.
the.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's all of those requirements that you bind the contractor or the developer on, so that they can't just somehow. pull
take the unit, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Because
that,
people, I've
Yeah,
talked to
no,
a couple of residents and, they brought that up.
yeah, no, and I have to tell you, when we did our first deal in Cambridge. Can you see the slide they had? So, yeah. Time management.
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So. So, when we started in Cambridge, trying to explain this to the residents, it does feel like a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And and it's funny, we did our first project in public housing in 2002. And we had nothing that we could point to. So then we did our second public housing project with tax credits in 2010, 8 years later. And so then we would take the residents over to the 2002 property and say, does it feel any different to you? As public housing, public housing, and they would say, no, it feels the same. It's the same staff, it's the same everything.
Yeah.
And so now, both the 2002 property and the 2010 property have come back to 100% control of the, housing authority. We never lost control of it,
Right.
but the ownership changes a little bit so that the investor can get their benefit.
Right.
But then now, both of those properties have come back 100% to the housing authority. And so now when we go around and talk to our residents, we can say, yeah, that leap of faith, look at how it's played out.
Yeah.
We got to improve all of our housing, but just like we said, after 10 years or 15
It's like
years,
after you pay off your car,
you get it back, but
you own it then.
you own it then, right? But you really want to, you gotta be, for me, as a housing authority, this is my career. And, my job has always been to protect people's homes and improve them. That, you really want to make sure it's done well and done right. And and we have figured it out in Cambridge. I mean, that was one of our jobs early on, was you've got to figure out how to protect, how can we be certain that we're protecting? And I do, as we go forward, I have actually a training that we do with residents, or we can do with the board, that kind of goes through what are the tools that we use to protect.
Right. Okay.
And, and I think that what's unique about us for you guys is that we're also a housing authority, and we have the same commitment to our residents and same goals. And we're not like, we don't have a secret agenda.
I know, you've done a great job walking us through. it
Yeah,
so far.
and I think that, so, you'll have, an option to potentially, if Red lets us go there. To talk about, you could select a developer, outside partner, and they might, there might be benefits or reasons why you want to do that, but. One of the things we're starting to do is also help housing authorities develop.
Right.
And whether that relationship can, help you guys. Achieve more of your goals, it's something that certainly is gonna be worth a future conversation.
But I don't want to take up all your.
Yeah, yeah, I gotta go to the bathroom, otherwise there could be a problem later.
Yeah, they said that.
And it's funny.
Oh, you have to. And I need to get into the segment. My hope is and every center that we have, like, the center that can be done, we lived in an adjacent community, we find every special revenue.
Amazing. Pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's
Particularly
serious.
kids after school.
Yeah. Do you have any sense of it? Possible, municipal bonds?
So I have some ideas that we may, we'll get into this, I think, in the next discussion here, because the ability to tap into the town's balance sheet is, is something that will enable us to have more control over the result. And that's part of what I think Margaret's going to get into next. And this is a completely new idea for the town. And on the other hand, way back in the day, and all these what's the issue for town municipal bonds, so we'll see. But that's where the affordable housing trust can say, you know, they can, you know, having a strong affordable housing as a partner. They give the town all these problems. And then there's still issues that Margaret said, like, there are new schools to be built, or, you know, new there's no capital plan, so that, you know, the finance committee likes to maintain good quality ratios, a top down rate. And they don't necessarily have to really thought about including us, and we need to be part of that. So it was always bingo. Hey, everybody back except Margaret. Okay. Gerald, can I interrupt you one second to say, I think we need to run until about 12:30 is my sense. There's only a couple, three more slides to go. Is everybody okay if we do that? And Cheryl, in her infinite wisdom, I anticipated that by having tuna sandwiches here. So they are, the salad sandwich. To get us through and make sure we don't have a sugar low here. I mean, we all good at that? All right. I think we're almost there. And the quality of the session we're having.
Oh, I like it. I don't know.
Chicken and the seafood salad.
I'm trying to think what to do with these guys.
Do you wanna?
Oh, they're gonna survive at about 2:30, and that's when the doors open. Yeah, they're not gonna sing.
Yeah.
I should have paused the recording.
I just asked them to just sort of socialize a little bit. Say hello to people. No, I do that after. That's what I was thinking. We do it anyway. Yeah. So maybe I like to eat. And this for the last building we're in. When people come in, I think they're crap. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so.
Hey, why doesn't everybody take their seats?
Middle child, so.
Margaret, I think everybody can go to,
Warm up.
I think everybody can go to 12:30.
Okay.
And there's a tuna salad or chicken salad sandwich there. I'm gonna partake when you.
Go off into the.
Keep your blood sugar high here.
Yeah.
Why don't we have everybody come back?
They'll be ready. Right, so I'm thinking maybe they shouldn't check it out before.
And we can pick up, my suggestion is we've only got a couple, three
And then
slides
after
left.
introduce them and also.
So to kind of get through the rest of the presentation with some of the other ands, ifs and buts and pros and cons. And then we'll just go into general discussion here. And just focus on the ones, the things that are really key to our decision today.
Sorry, Rich.
Margaret, is this where you'd like to pick up? Talking about the capacity requirements?
Yeah,
Okay, perfect.
with the rate registers.
Yes.
All right, so now do you want me to begin or do you want to begin?
Well, I can start and then just jump in. We can tag team. So essentially, we wanted to include some information here, and it's also included in the updated conversion assessment report that was included. It's in the last section, section 5. And so this is related to, so for RAD section 18, you're required to do construction in order to implement the conversion. And so to do that, what we've talked about is to fund the renovations showing the 20-year viability. You're likely to need to use 4% low-income housing tax credits, which is the largest program to fund the construction and modernization of affordable housing, as well as a permanent mortgage. And these two sources of funds is something that you would need to use at Seabeds and Cook in order to do the RAD Section 18 blend, but you'd also have to do at Linden and Chambers as part of the redevelopment. So this applies to you even if you do choose to do Section 22, but you're looking to do a redevelopment at Linden and Chambers. So as part of that, if an investor and a bank is looking to put in equity and a permanent mortgage, there's a couple of things that they look at in each organization to determine capacity to essentially complete the construction projects on time and on schedule. One of the main items that they look for is staff capacity and organizational stability. And that is essentially, they're looking at staff capacity and experience, having done similar types of work, having managed 4% low-income housing tax credit properties, and organizational stability in terms of just having continuous staff that's at the organization as well as board members. Then they also look at an agency's or developer's financial capacity to meet liquidity and guarantee requirements. So these are requirements, the guarantee requirements around the completion of the construction work. And the reason why there's liquidity requirements is if there's any need to put in additional funding to meet the guarantee requirements to complete construction, they want to know that essentially there's funding to back that up. And that liquidity requirement has to be unrestricted funding. And so typically, the way that a funder sets these requirements is that liquidity would be at 10% of the loan amount. And then they also have a net worth requirement at 300% of the loan amount. And so, for example, that might mean that your liquidity requirement might be $4 million. And that has to be unrestricted assets. So assets that can be used immediately to help cover an additional cost. And net worth is essentially the worth of all of your properties and programs. And that needs to be $12 million in this case.
That also can sometimes needs to be unrestricted or somehow something that can be tapped into. And so for housing authorities, it's been a real challenge to meet that unrestricted requirement. And I know it was hard for us in Cambridge when we did our first transaction to be able to demonstrate how we had funds that were neither state public housing funds or federal public housing funds that could be used to meet those requirements. And you know, we're a 2,500 unit housing authority, and it was a challenge for us. So scale it down, and you can really appreciate how it can be a challenge to a medium or smaller size housing authority.
And the last thing that they look at is prior experience with the low-income housing tax credit program. And that's because there are specific rules that have to be met related to the accounting, related to the property management, related to meeting construction milestones. And so they place extra importance on this. And so, as Margaret mentioned, you know, these requirements can be challenging to meet, especially for small, mid-size, and non-moving to work public housing authorities that may not have as much flexibility when it comes to unrestricted assets or not as much past experience doing low-income housing tax credit projects. And so, in that case, in order to attract that funding that's needed to do construction, it requires these housing authorities to essentially partner with well-capitalized developers that have substantial amount of low-income housing tax credit experience. And so just to quickly describe the process of selecting a development partner, typically what happens is that there's a request for proposal that's put out that describes the project, describes engagement, also includes any non-negotiable terms. that the Housing Authority has, and they will get back proposals from a variety of different developers that can fall into four categories: private for-profit developers, private nonprofit developers, nonprofit community development corporations, as well as local housing authorities. And the benefit there with the local housing authority is not always, it doesn't always require a formal RFP process to partner with a local housing authority, because it could fall into the bucket of an intergovernmental agreement.
And I'll just say that DHCD kind of leans in favor of relationships with private for-profit developers or private nonprofit developers as the path for housing authorities to go down. The model that we've been doing where, we self-develop in Cambridge, so we don't do a partner. We've gotten, the in-house capability to do that is really unique. And as we start, we're doing additional projects with other housing authorities, and we're putting those projects together. Some of the feedback from the HCD is like, we're not quite sure this is what we like, but, they may not like it, but the other housing authorities really like it because it allows for them to have more control, local control than what they would have if they went for the routes that the HCD has set up with the private and for-profit or nonprofit entities. But Chelsea Housing Authority, or Salem Housing Authority, or Somerville Housing Authority have gone that private, nonprofit, private, for-profit path, because that's really the path that has been open to them, and that's the one they've chosen. Where the housing authorities that are doing tax credits themselves are just a handful of Cambridge, Brookline, Chelmsford, being three of the biggest ones. But Chelmsford and Brookline have pretty much stayed within their world. Cambridge has been the one that's kind of reached out, and part of that is just because we kept getting phone calls from people saying, how can you help us do what we did in Cambridge? And eventually we started to say, all right, let's see what we can do. And so that's kind of what's been available.
Did you say that Chelsea did not use low income tax credits for their development?
The project they're doing with Corcoran right now did not use low income housing tax credits, but it really relied heavily on a lot of DHCD subsidies. And they're taking a 92 unit state public housing development and adding close to 270 units on top of that. And all 270 units are market rate units, and they're only replacing the 92 units with, deeply affordable units. So they've given away the land to a private developer who can then use that to build a lot of market rate housing. And in doing that, they're getting the 92 replaced, but they're really not seeing a growth in affordable units. And for them to do that, the amount of subsidy they gave on a per affordable housing unit was probably some of the highest numbers I've ever seen. And then the city made a lot of concessions as well to make that deal actually.
But I think Framingham did the same thing in Cape and Court, right?
Or Somerville did Cape.
Somerville, I mean, yeah.
Margaret, are you familiar with the new development in East Boston?
Which one, Maverick or, Orient Heights.
Orient Heights.
Yeah, so Boston Housing Authority selected Trinity Financial as the partner there.
I went over to see that.
Yeah, I drove through it not that long ago too, so here we go. And so Trinity actually is doing the redevelopment, using the guidelines from the Boston Housing Authority, but they'll do the property management and maintenance of it going forward. And Boston has used that model a lot for their family sites. So like Maverick in East Boston or Orient Heights. Mary McCormick in South Boston is another one where they partnered, I think, with Beacon Communities.
Didn't they go with Steve Wynn?
They have did a win one as well,
I think they're adding,
Whittier.
they've got like 1,054 units over there and they're gonna add close to 3,000.
Yeah, so
It's
at
crazy.
Bunker Hill, that's, it's funny, the Cork and Jennison had been in prior Bunker Hill, they called us up and asked, we took our disposition application that we've been doing and then used it at Bunker Hill. And so they've gone through section 18 for Bunker Hill, but and so they've gotten the section 8 vouchers, which is really valuable, but the only way they can economically make that deal work is if they do 2 extra units of market rate units for 1 affordable unit. So that section of Charlestown will get 3,000 new units and only 1,000, they'll only be replacing the original 1,000 units that have been affordable, which the community's been kind of up at arms about because of all of the concerns about traffic and the like. But those, so those are the kinds of deals that can be out there. I think Chelmsford has managed to do some really nice deals within their portfolio where they've been able to add, some number of affordable housing, not only in Chelmsford, but Littleton and some of the surrounding towns with the nonprofit that they've set up. And then Brookline's been using it a lot to redo their federal portfolio, and they actually are just closing or just closed on one where they tore down kind of a really defunct 2-story federal development that just wasn't working, and they're replacing it with brand new federal public housing to grant units that I think have been really, some really good work there. But Boston has gotten to the point on their elderly stuff where they feel like they better start developing. They're trying to develop the renovation work or the low income housing tax credit program themselves, because eventually they wouldn't have any property that they would be managing. It would all go out to the private developers. And I mean, sometimes I've been I've been pulled aside at events from residents at the Boston Housing Authority that would say, we're just not happy. We don't like what Beacon's doing. We don't like what Trinity's doing. So I can't speak to that directly because we have not used that model in Cambridge because we've done our own self-development. And we're working right now with Medford Housing Authority on a transaction where our initial plan was then to serve as a developer, but we actually have to, Cambridge is stepping in co-developing with them because the bank and the lending and equity community, all of the thresholds that we just mentioned, Medford, even though Medford has a good organizational strength, couldn't check enough of the boxes for the investor and lender to get comfortable with, and so they needed Cambridge's balance sheet and they needed Cambridge's experience on tax credit certification. They already had Cambridge experience on development because my team has already been in place there. Joe Nally in particular have been working really hard with the Medford team to execute the development plan. But even though we were all over the development plan, the lack of our balance sheet or the fact that Medford's balance sheet, they couldn't really barely meet the minimums and couldn't really show the net worth and then had no tax credit experience was enough that the only way we could attract somebody to actually make the investment was to pitch a Cambridge role in that deal.
How many units did they have?
They have 600, almost 700 state and public housing units and about 1,000 Section 8 vouchers. So, 2 sizes of units, but the voucher program is a big difference.
Yeah. Let's see if we can push
Yeah.
through the last couple of slides.
One quick
Yeah,
comment.
yeah.
This, because under either option, we might be using the low income tax credit, that this would apply regardless of.
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny because you're gonna need, the only way you're ever gonna move Linden and Chambers forward is to do low income housing tax credits. So then it's like, if you're already gonna do it for one property, you really get a lot of economic benefit if you did it for Linden and Linden, not for Captain Robert Cook and Seabeds. And so I looked at, and this, I give Steve a lot of credit because he really pushed me to look at, I probably have 10 different financial models running between, if you did section 22 with low income housing tax credits, what would it look like if you didn't use low income housing tax credit? Because I know there, you know, if you don't have to do a developer partner, that's always the preferred route. Could you make the numbers work? What if you did, you know, only 10 years of renovation work at Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook? I mean, you know, all these different models to try to figure out, is there a way you could go forward without having to trigger tax credits? And the bottom line is you have to do them at Linden and Chambers. And if you really want to achieve the maximum of what you can and pencil out Linden and Chambers, the only way to do that is then to do the tax credits at both properties. And the fact that you're already kind of jumping into the pond for Linden Chambers says, well, you're going to do that, you're going to figure it out. You might as well, you know, take that economic benefit for Seabeds and Robert Cook as well. And again, that's the only way. If you really want to redevelop Linden and Chambers, it's really leaning into this federal repositioning. Because that's the resources that are going to help your state portfolio. And again, you know, I look at it, you know, we're trying to solve the entire, you know, we're trying to bring every one of your properties up. And so to do that, you really got to use all of your full resources and then create some like the Faircloth units to be able to do that.
Last couple of slides.
Last couple of slides. Keep going. Don't let me talk now.
No.
You know the
Right.
drill.
This is all really important. I just want to get it all out on the table. We don't have to dwell on anything
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think this table is familiar because we went through it last time. It's also in the report. But essentially what this tries to do is capture each partnership with a development partner is going to look a little bit different depending on how much negotiating you're able to do and how much leverage you have. But essentially it tends to be an aspect of the pros is essentially what you get out of the partnership. The cons in some ways is maybe what you have to give up in order to get those benefits. And so essentially, under that first category of benefits, you're really looking at, you're getting access to a balance sheet that meets the underwriting requirement. You're being able to use their LIHTC affordable housing experience. Potentially, you're also sharing risk and ability to meet guarantee requirements. There's the potential of sharing some of the pre-development expenses, which can be difficult to finance. They sometimes bring relationships with different third parties that they can provide. So that's with lenders, investors, architects, general contractors. Some developers have various different areas of expertise that they can bring to the project around resident services or green design. And then, I mean, ultimately, the reason why you go down this route is that it addresses some of the issues around small PHA staff and governance issues. In terms of then what needs to be in some ways provided in order to get those benefits is that you may end up sharing the financial benefit of a project. So that's either a developer fee or ongoing cash flow. It may also result in a change in management agent. And when you change the management agent, there's often different practices, intake procedures, and ultimately what the financial drawback of that is that it results in a loss of management fees. It may also result in a change in ownership and long-term control of the property. And then finally, you're essentially sharing control over decision-making related to some day-to-day items around management design, who you partner with, and what the goals for the project are. And so those are just kind of the essentially the ingredients that are part of any developer owner engagement. And it depends a little bit on what you're able to negotiate and what works for the project. And the last slide that we have is just thinking about ways that the Needham Housing Authority can strengthen its negotiating position. And these are, I think this is something that there will need to be continuous conversations about. But it's good to start thinking about it now so that work can be done to prepare the housing authority. So one essential, so we've kind of broken those out by staff capacity, financial stability and strength, and being able to draw on your local relationships in Needham. In terms of staff capacity and organizational stability, I think what you'd be looking to do is to ensure that the Needham Housing Authority Board continues to have a varied set of experiences and also commitment to the Needham Housing Authority mission. So that may mean having people who have different backgrounds in legal aspects, financial, real estate, social services. And a really important aspect in terms of looking at governance stability is the continuity of members on the board, having a board that's active in the community and that has demonstrable accomplishments. In terms of the staff, the key item is to make sure that there's acquisition and retention of leadership, both in terms of executive leadership and also with staff at the Housing Authority who have some redevelopment skills or experience. And this can be either by augmenting your current staff, or it can be by having relationships with third-party consultants who bring that to the table. For the financial stability and strength piece, I think the key thing is to start off by looking at your balance sheet and seeing how much you have in unrestricted funding and net worth. That will give you kind of a baseline of what you're starting off with, and then conversation should be had around how to augment that if possible. So as part of the one of the pilot program suggestions that Margaret had drafted for the meeting with Chair Arciera was exploring the possibility of working with a larger entity to create a pool of funding that could essentially be used in order to meet those liquidity requirements for a variety of organizations, because this problem isn't unique to the Needham Housing Authority. It's a challenge for a lot of small and mid-sized housing authorities to meet. So there could be an initiative to make sure that there's a pool of funding set aside that could then be used to support organizations like Needham. The final bullet there is there could be organizations that provide funding in Massachusetts. There's, for example, the Property and Casualty Initiative and CDAC that provide funding around pre-development and supporting affordable housing projects. And they may be a good place to start about essentially having a conversation around this challenge in meeting liquidity and guarantee requirements and seeing how they can potentially provide support. And then in terms of strengthening your negotiating position, I mean, I think one real strength that the Needham Housing Authority brings to the table is that you have the 75 years of experience of providing affordable housing in Needham. You have a lot of relationships with staff, residents, and boards in Needham, as well as with your state and federal representatives. So continuing to cultivate and strengthen and maintain those relationships, I think is important, because that will help you your negotiating position. And then also the more funding that you can say that you already have received for projects, that can be through CPA funding, the state funding that you received through ARPA, and also fair cloth units can essentially strengthen your negotiating position, because you've already done a lot of work in terms of getting the financing in place to do the construction work.
That's the last slide.
That's the last slide. Okay. I know there's one more slide that maybe we might want to do before we sort of get into final discussion, which is if we make a decision
Oh, yes.
now, if the board makes a decision now between option one and option two, what happens next? So maybe we should do that one quickly as well. That one, yes.
So this is really if you end up deciding to do the RAD section 18 blend. And so essentially what would happen then is if the board decides to go pursue this option, first step is really to prepare the Cook and Seabeds application to HUD. The expectation would be to start off with Cook and Seabeds and then do High Rock Estates at a later date, given that that financing is going to be a little bit more complicated to put together. But for that Cook and Seabeds application, HUD requires a RAD property conditions assessment. It'll draw on the property conditions report that has been created, but it does have other specific requirements. So first, the Needham Housing Authority would need to procure a RAD PCA consultant to put together this report. Then the CHA would work on the RAD Section 18 application. And as part of this, we'd have to do a minimum of 2 resident meetings. So all in all, we expect that application process of putting it together to take approximately 10 weeks. And once it's submitted to HUD, the expectation is that you'd hear back around 3 months later. At the same time, in anticipation of receiving the approval from HUD, the Needham Housing Authority would need to procure an architect to start putting together the scope of services or scope of work for Cook and Seabeds. What we proposed here was that the request for proposal for A&E designer services for Cook and Seabeds would go out in March of 2023. And that would essentially put you on track to starting construction at the end of 2024. And they would start off by, they have good property conditions report. They'd go out and get, more information from the residents and confirm the findings of the property conditions report. And then they move into doing the scope of work and then the construction drawings. At the same time, too, it's important to get a good legal team put into place. So that legal services RFP that was issued last year would be reissued in May of this year. And then as soon as the application approval comes in from HUD, the Needham Housing Authority would begin RAD implementation for Cook and Seabeds and work on that while also working on with the architect to get to construction closing in 2024.
And then just what it would look like if we went to section 22 route, we would not need to do the PCA work because we wouldn't necessarily be going immediately into construction. We still would need to have some resident meetings. We would still need about 10 weeks to put the application together. We wouldn't necessarily, but we could move forward with selecting an A&E firm. We might want to bump up the legal services RFP a little bit sooner because you want to have them in place so that when HUD approved your application, you need them to do some work around implementation. And then, in terms of whether or not we started planning for our construction project, would be at the board's discretion in terms of the timing of that.
Okay, great. And I guess I will ask, result of all this work it's been a year and a half, it's been 18 months getting to this point. Knowing us and reflecting the input of Steve, which has been highly valued, do you have a recommendation for the board that you'd like to articulate?
So I spent a lot of time, and again, credit to Steve, because I really feel, and I'm sorry that he's not here, but, I do want to say that, his opinion, his voice, his comments and concerns were things that really required us to really, do almost like a 360 view to kind of get to a point where I felt comfortable, not only representing what my recommendation would be, but I shared with Reg that I actually, shared, Joe Nally and I shared this presentation with Mike Johnson, who's the executive director of the Cambridge Housing Authority, the person I report to. Just for, to make sure that, we were as balanced and thoughtful about our approach in terms of then feeling like I can say, that it's not just my recommendation, but the recommendation of the team at the Cambridge Housing Authority, and including our executive director, that we would recommend that you move forward with option one, which would be the RAD one, section 18. Feeling like that gives you the maximum flexibility to achieve, not only your goals within your federal public housing portfolio, but the collateral benefit of supporting the housing authority's objectives and goals for its Linden and Chambers property as well. That we think that it is the strongest of the two, and it's not to diminish it's like in some ways it's not, you can't do bad because you're stepping ahead in such a profound way with either one of those two options. But for me, you'll give your team, and your future development goals, the maximum flexibility and options and tools with that option.
And I'm gonna jump in here, because when we were discussing this meeting, I'm probably been the board member, probably I have been the board member, who some of the people dive into this thing for the longest period of time. So I suppose I should be asked to put myself on the book as well. And I, again, echo what Margaret said about Steve's input, just more than invaluable. I can't claim to have done 9 prior projects like Margaret has, but I can claim to have done 1 prior project like Margaret has. And I was just down visiting them last summer. I know the residents there, the people who are on the residents advisory committee, and so I usually drive in unannounced, and there's somebody who walks up to me. In this case, it was the head of the LTO at the time. We did the Little Neck Village project, and a lot of catching up and family stuff and so forth. But how's it going? And the answer is we love our new apartments. But the one thing we wish that had been different is the local control thing. The company that is doing the management for the town of Marion, which of course is much smaller than we are, just as small, relatively speaking, as we are to Medford or Cambridge, there was no option of doing it any other way except with a partner. It was a great partner. But the one thing we have to say is they just run things by the book, and there's no heart and soul and understanding of things. So with that background, 1/9 of Margaret's background here, what I have been struck by listening to the whole discussion, besides the local control part, is how important the Linden Chambers redevelopment is to the path of the most recently it was at the CPC, which is 2 days ago. And one of the many things they grilled us about or latched on to is instantly understanding this ability to transfer the federal subsidies and how that could enable a larger project. That is clearly something that people are quite understanding right away. If you look at, we've got fortunately a choice between 2 pretty good options, considering 2 million, millions of dollars additional subsidy per year, lots of different moving parts. But at the end of the day, if there's a tiebreaker for me, it's the ability to repurpose those 108 units of subsidy from the federal side to the state side. And the second dimension that was really kind of
The state or the federal?
from the federal to state.
No,
Did I say it backwards?
No, that would just make
It
it.
would be fun.
I thought you were talking about London Chambers.
No, so, if we do option one, it will put into the bank, it will spin off unused federal subsidies.
Or London.
For
Which can
Linda,
be
right,
used for that.
yeah. So that's part one of the sort of
Yeah.
really the tiebreaker, between the two great options we had. And, number two is again, the town support. And, the third thing is, that, the fact that it'll move us to the front of the list with the state, the HCD approval process. Because they've demonstrated in the past, and they continue to demonstrate, that if we can offer this as part of what we're putting together the financing layer cake for Linden Chambers, that will help unlock their support and their money that, we need to get over the finish line to doing phase one. And then, the other thing I just want to say is also in terms of my sense of urgency of making the decision today. If we all feel that we're sufficiently informed, as informed as we're ever going to get this, is a comment that Margaret made, and you made that on Wednesday to the CPC, which is like every month, the cost of this project goes up 0.75%. Every year, it's like 9% increase in construction costs per year. This is back to normal. This isn't the COVID craziness, but so, there's a lot of things to be done in the future. But we can't even start to contemplate what that is, without the board making a decision today. And yes, there's additional complexity risk. I think that's, we need to have our eyes open on that. And yes, we need to strengthen our staff and our finances and our board and everything else. But I think the design, the commitment over the many, many years this has been discussed is to do everything possible to increase the probability of or possibility of local control, retaining local control and so forth. So my recommendation would be to go with option number one as well.
That's
I'd like
fine.
to
I
add
like,
one thing to what you said.
Certainly.
Excuse me,
And then you next, Jazz.
I'm sorry, it's with the section 8 vouchers, with, this is, I'm going with number one. They become project based.
Yes.
And with number two, they're resident based.
Yes.
So that is going to add to our ability to borrow money.
So that's an additional point. Yeah. That's a good one.
And if I could just jump in one extra point, and I think I might have mentioned this at the CPA meeting is. So the state is flush with money right now because they have a lot of American Recovery Act money. That's been identified and dedicated to affordable housing. So it feels like the next couple of years, the amount of resources are going to be at some of the highest. That have been, to me is also a critical element of timing. So if we could start to put together, we were talking a little bit at the CPC meeting about zoning schedule and, why it might be better to be, potentially in the running for applying for a soft money for Linden Chambers in the next funding round at the end of this current year versus in the end of 2024. It's just that you're gonna, the earlier you can get through the door, the more resources that are gonna be available, and the magnet will be the federal public housing operating subsidy, plus the quality of the project and the last and probably potential the most profound is the overall support from the community as demonstrated by, the zoning approval that will be necessary, but by the substantial contribution and that we've already received from CPA.
Yes.
yeah, I just wanted to add that I was always in favor of option one with the club. And and on the other hand, I don't think it would be fair to Linden and Chambers if we didn't go that option because let's face it, they've been here the longest and they really need a do-over and more. And if we went with option two, it would kind of leave them in the lurch or out in left field, not knowing whether they're gonna get some decent affordable housing and that stuff. Plus the fact that, you know, we don't want to lose it to women developers either, so.
Penny, how about yourself? What do you, what's your,
I think
Comments
one
and
of my
thoughts?
biggest concerns is not having to depend on developers. And I agree with number one. And the fact that there is a sort of requirement that we actually start first. Yeah, actually start,
I appreciated that comment from the rest.
yeah.
Eleanor?
I also for number one, it just seems to offer more advantage. And it seems like either way, with the low income tax credits that we would have to partner with another organization. So that wouldn't, we wouldn't, going with option two wouldn't mean that we would not want to do that. And then Ed's point about the budget things.
Cheryl, can I ask you what you think? You've been quiet throughout the discussion, but I want to make sure your voice is
They're making
heard
decisions.
here as well.
And I guess I missed it somewhere because I thought option one involved the development.
It does.
It does, okay, it involves
Both of
bringing in
them,
a
both of
developer
them, but
on board.
Yeah, you know, any movement at Linden and Chambers is gonna involve a developer.
I like Janice's comments, however, about option one and in supporting women chambers. I think that's great. And also the ability to get gain additional affordable housing, keeping that door open. And in Needham, I think is great. And then I was looking at my fact sheet for section 18, and it appears that we do not lose our Ross grant funding and our FSS funding as well.
Yeah, so near term, you definitely won't, because you'll have the federal public housing units at Hierarch Homes.
Ah, okay, so
So,
that's
yeah.
a connection.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah,
completely.
and then, you know, then the idea would be to, you know, I don't know as, you know, I know a little bit about both, but then, you know, we would need to work through a contingency plan. If after Hierarch, it would go away, then we would need to build within your operating budget, the comparable amount
Mhm.
of the loss and
Are
with
those
the
projects
FSS.
available to like a place with project-based vouchers?
They can be, but it just depends on, you know, you move from the public housing branch of HUD to the multifamily branch of HUD. And so then there are slightly different rules within that. I think there's definitely an FSS program within multifamily. Ross may come in a different name or a different form, but you know, one of the things, you know, we talked about, you know, I mean, you're gonna have a lot of extra money, a fair amount of we're gonna want to try to use the capital, you know, to make capital, but we can't also lose fact about resident services and trying to do some enhanced resident services. And so oftentimes, you know, when we've done under the debt ways that you look at, you have to make sure you know, you can't borrow every penny, so you have to have a debt service coverage ratio that throws cash flow back to the housing authority. And so depending upon the size of the debt service coverage ratio, oftentimes it can be enough to support enhanced resident services. And so you treat it kind of as a below the line expense, but you manage to make certain that you achieve that below the line outcome so that you have the enhanced resident services that I think have been, you know, certainly beneficial on projects that I've worked in other communities, but certainly some are really beneficial here in Needham as well. And so that can be something that can be part of our modeling as we think about things going forward.
Any other comments from anybody? Are we ready to entertain a motion?
Are we gonna do this?
All right, I'm
Big
sorry,
vote.
Ross, it's not a public hearing, but
Well, there was a spot on the agenda where it said public comment.
um, I,
I didn't see that.
all right, let me,
Comments from the public, if any.
Oh, it is. on
Right.
this.
all right, Ross, you're good, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Speaking as a resident under guiding principles of development, I was glad to hear, Reggie, that you wanted to add climate action. That's something that the town is committed to. So it's something that the housing authority should respond to, as well as, it says comply with green NEDM. I guess that's environmental greenness, and there are other related issues, open space, a pandemic response. Should be built into the guiding principles and priorities, as well as some idea of neighborhood and community. It used to be that some of the projects that the Needham Housing Authority did were community, family, modernization. Those were the buzzwords. Now it's High Rock Estates. It's like a different kind of marketing. But the community is still important, and especially where the High Rock School is going to be developed. That's part of the neighborhood. It used to be that when schools were developed, there was a community component to it. So I think that could be helpful, in developing Chambers and High Rock to consider it as a neighborhood community. And there was an old idea that the Needham Housing Authority, or the town in general, I guess, was interested in supporting the idea of a development corporation. So you're talking about having a partner, a developer as a partner. Is that something that you think, and this is, I guess, my question, is that something that could be developed in the sort of an indigenous development corporation for this purpose?
We don't know yet.
Well, it's just an idea to throw out there. And the other thing that, one of the things that keeps changing is the mission statement. And we're going back to, in one of these things, sort of the original mission statement that you've enunciated, Reggie, which is to be the best landlord possible and to do the long range planning. But I think part of the report, which I haven't found, that Cambridge Housing did, I think in response to a question that I made, what's the quality of life? What do you have to say about that? And the response was, I think, in terms of a mission statement, that was kind of expansive. It included a lot of things, included embedded in the middle of the report, and I'm sorry, I can't find it. That it was, resident-centered, a term that Janice brought up and a term that I've tried to bring up, and that was embedded into one of the list of mission statements that at least was being studied and maybe looked at, so.
Can I bring you just to comments on the decision that we're making here, which is what the subject is. There's a lot of other things to talk about, but we're about to make a decision here.
Yeah, well, one thing we talked about was having the 3 minutes, at every meeting, so I guess.
No, you're down to like 30 seconds, but
Okay.
that's why I was trying to help you focus on our decision here.
Thank you very much. I need that. Okay, well, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for coming. I really appreciate that you took the time of all our residents to be here today and listen to all this stuff. So really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think I have something to offer. I've actually done some development on Mission Health. We had a CPC and it was gangbusters.
Well, I'm sure you'll be sitting in all our future meetings as well. So thank you. Okay, I am going to make a motion that the Needham Housing Authority Board of Commissioners adopt what is known as option number 1 or strategy number 1 as presented today to authorize the Cambridge Housing Authority, our consultants, our development consultants, to proceed with all deliberate speed with pursuing a RAD section 18 blend repositioning application and conversion of our federal properties. Have I missed anything in that? wording there, that would be
Yeah, I
good.
mean, I mean, I think, right, so I would say the vote specific to Captain Robert Cook and seabeds and the hold. And it will eventually apply to High Rock. Homes,
Yeah,
so I
as
think-
presented,
Right, but we'll come back for. High Rock.
starting with Captain Seabeds and Cook.
Yeah.
And continuing to High Rock Homes, because I think we've discussed that. It's gonna be done in sequence, but we're making the decision. The
To
whole
go
thing
in
goes
that direction.
together.
Yeah.
You know, we are making, we're not gonna be able to change our mind down the road and say, we don't want to. Well, we change our mind about High Rock Estate, so we'll word it as, starting with Seabeds and Cook and preceding thereafter. With the repositioning of High Rock Estates. And who was it second? Second, Janice. I think that's very appropriate. Is there
Thank you.
any further discussion? Hearing none, I'd like to do a roll call vote on this as well, because this is probably one of our bigger decisions we've made in a few years.
Eleanor Evans, I.
Eleanor Evans, aye. Janice.
Dennis Bennett, aye.
Janice Bennett, aye.
Penny Kirk, aye.
Ed Scheidler, aye.
And Reg Foster, aye.
Yay.
Monumental.
Thank you, Cambridge Housing.
Yes, thank you.
And I
so
just want
much.
to, we will be back at a, very soon at a future meeting,
I
because
was
we'll
gonna
have a.
say, you're not going
We're not
anywhere.
going anywhere. Without the bad petting showing up. But we will have a series of motions specific to the RAD application for Captain Robert Cook and Seabed. So may not, definitely won't be on your February agenda, but we might look to target your March meeting
Okay.
to do that. We just have to time out the resident meetings, because I think your votes have to take effect, take action after the resident meetings are
Okay.
held. And so we want to make sure those get done and done well, and then have a more tailored specific vote that the RAD program requires at a future meeting.
Sounds good.
Right.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for the extra 40+ minutes here.
We have to vote to adjourn.
We do, and that's what I was gonna, I think your motion to adjourn from Penny Kirk. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Janice. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It's unanimous. Have a nice day, everybody.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. Take care.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Nancy.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank
you, Margaret.